Anime autopsy here, and I need you to understand something before we begin this 3-hour descent into emotional devastation. I need you to understand that you are not watching a video about sad fictional pirates. You are watching a video about a man in Japan who has spent nearly 3 decades perfecting the art of making grown adults weep over drawings. Eiichiro Oda, the fictional pirate creator. Man himself, Oda Sensei, whatever you want to call him. This man does not write backstories. He constructs precision-engineered emotional landmines and buries them in your favorite manga. And then he waits. He waits years, sometimes decades. And then he detonates them at the exact moment your defenses are lowest. And you sit there at 2 a.m, tears streaming down your face, asking yourself why you care this much about a reindeer with a blue nose or a skeleton who can't stop making skull jokes. This is not an accident. This is not talent operating on instinct. This is a system. And today, we are going to dissect that system with the cold, clinical detachment of a coroner performing an autopsy on your feelings. Hence the channel name. We're going to crack open the ribcage of One Piece's emotional core, and we're going to examine every organ, every artery, every single narrative choice that pumps blood into these backstories and makes them hurt the way they do. And by the end of these 3 hours, you will never be able to read a One Piece flashback the same way again. You will see the machinery, you will understand the method, and somehow, impossibly, it will still work on you anyway. Because that is how good fictional pirate creator man is at his job. Let me take you back to chapter 1. The year is 1997. A young Eiichiro Oda, fresh off his time as an assistant, publishes the first chapter of a manga about a rubber boy who wants to be king of the pirates. And in that very first chapter, before we even understand what the Grand Line is, before we know what a devil fruit does to your swimming career, before any of the lore exists, Oda does something that will define his storytelling for the next 3 decades. He has Shanks lose an arm for Luffy. A Sea King bites it clean off. One of the most powerful pirates in the world, a man we will later learn was on the Pirate King's crew, sacrifices a limb to save a 7-year-old boy from a glorified fish. And here is the thing that my mind brain has been chewing on for years. That scene is not a backstory. Not technically. It is happening in the present timeline of chapter 1. But it functions as one. It is the prototype. The proof of concept. Oda is showing us, right from the very beginning, that sacrifice is the currency of One Piece. That the people who matter will pay in blood and bone and irreplaceable pieces of themselves for the people they love. Shanks did not need to lose that arm. The man has Conqueror's haki that can knock out 100,000 fishmen. He could have scared that Sea King into the next ocean. Oda even admitted in an early SBS, Volume 4 if you want to check my receipts, that he originally did not plan for Shanks to lose the arm, but his editor told him the story needed more impact. So Oda went back and drew the arm off. He literally carved sacrifice into the foundation of his manga, because someone told him the emotional stakes were not high enough. That is the first thing you need to understand about how One Piece backstories work. They are not organic outgrowths of character development. They are calculated, they are revised, they are edited and re-edited until they achieve maximum devastation. When fictional pirate creator man sits at his desk at 3 a.m, running on coffee, and spite, and whatever dark energy fuels mangaka, he is not asking himself what happened to this character. He is asking himself, what is the most painful thing that could have happened to this character? And how do I make the audience feel every single moment of it? Now let me show you the next evolution of the system. Jump forward to chapter 78 through 100, the Arlong Park arc. For 77 chapters, we have known Nami as the navigator, the thief, the girl who betrays the Straw Hats for money, and seems completely untrustworthy. We have watched her scheme and manipulate and act like currency matters more than crew. And then Oda pulls the trigger on the landmine he has been burying since her introduction. Nami was a slave. Not metaphorically, literally. Arlong forced an 8-year-old girl to draw maps for him by holding her entire village hostage. Her adoptive mother Bellamere, a former Marine who found Nami and her sister Nojiko in a war zone and chose to raise them despite having no money and no prospects, stood in front of Arlong and his fishermen and declared that she had 2 daughters. She could have said she lived alone. She could have paid the tax for one person and let Nami and Nojiko hide. But she refused to deny her children existed. So Arlong shot her in the head while Nami watched. That is chapter 78. That is the moment One Piece stops being a fun adventure manga and becomes something else entirely. And notice what Oda does with the structure. He does not tell us Nami's backstory when we meet her. He waits. He lets us distrust her. He lets us see her as a shallow, money-obsessed traitor. And then he shows us why she is the way she is, and suddenly every single thing she has done makes devastating sense. The money was never for her. It was ransom. She was trying to buy her village's freedom 1 beery at a time, and Arlong kept moving the goalposts, and she had been doing this alone since she was a child. The placement matters. This is the second principle of the Oda method. A backstory told too early has no weight because we do not care about the character yet. A backstory told too late feels like an excuse, like the author is trying to retroactively justify behaviour we have already judged. But a backstory told at the exact moment of crisis, when the character is at their lowest point, when they have pushed everyone away and are about to break, that is when the emotional mathematics hit different. Nami sitting in the dirt, stabbing Arlong's tattoo on her arm over and over, screaming in frustration because she cannot escape. And then Luffy puts his hat on her head. He does not say anything profound. He just puts his hat on her head and walks toward Arlong Park to destroy it. That is the payoff. That is what the backstory earned. 77 chapters of setup for one of the most cathartic moments in manga history. Oda-sensei learned something in that arc that he would refine for the next 1,000 chapters. He learned that the backstory is not separate from the story. It is a weapon you deploy at the moment of maximum impact. Every flashback in One Piece is timed. Every revelation is earned. And the longer you wait, the harder it hits. Because the audience has had time to invest, to care, to form opinions that the backstory will then either confirm or completely demolish. This is what we are going to explore over the next 3 hours. The taxonomy of trauma, the architecture of tears, the specific, repeatable, almost scientific methods that fictional pirate creator man uses to reach into your chest and squeeze. We are going to look at parents who die with smiles on their faces. We are going to look at children who inherit missions they never asked for. We are going to look at genocide, slavery, systemic oppression, and one extremely sad robot who just wanted to go on an adventure. We are going to rank suffering, which feels morally questionable, but we are doing it anyway, because that is the kind of channel this is. So settle in, grab some tissues, and remember, you chose to click on this video. Whatever emotional damage you sustain over the next 3 hours, that is on you. I am merely the coroner. I just report what I find when I cut the story open. And what I find consistently is that Eiichiro Oda knows exactly what he is doing, and he has been doing it since Chapter 1. And this brings us to the question that has been rattling around in my mind brain ever since I started treating One Piece analysis like a second job that does not pay. The question is simple. Why do some backstories hit harder than others? Because objectively, on paper, there are backstories in One Piece that should devastate me more than they do. There are characters who have suffered longer, lost more, endured cruelties that make other tragedies look like minor inconveniences. And yet, when I think about the moments that actually broke me, that had me pausing the chapter to stare at my ceiling and question my life choices, they are not always the ones with the highest body counts or the longest durations of suffering. They are the ones that were placed correctly. I call this the flashback placement theory, and I am going to argue that the timing of a backstory reveal accounts for roughly 60% of its emotional impact. The content matters, obviously. The content is the payload, but the placement is the delivery system. You can have the most devastating backstory in the world, but if you drop it at the wrong moment in the narrative, it will land with a thud instead of a detonation. Oda understands this better than any mangaka working today, and I can prove it by looking at how he structured two of the most emotionally destructive arcs in the entire series. Let us talk about Enies Lobby. Specifically, let us talk about Nico Robin and the moment fictional pirate creator Man decided to speedrun making an entire fanbase sob. Robin joins the crew at the end of Alabasta, chapter 218. She is mysterious. She is dangerous. She literally tried to help Crocodile take over an entire kingdom like 5 minutes ago. And for the next 170 chapters, Oda keeps her at arm's length from the audience. We know she can read poneglyphs. We know she wants to find the true history. We know she has a darkness in her past that she refuses to discuss. But we do not know the details. We are not allowed to know the details, because Oda is waiting. He is waiting for Enies Lobby. He is waiting for the moment when Robin has been captured by the world government, when she has told the Straw Hats to abandon her, when she is standing on that bridge ready to die because she believes she does not deserve to live. That is when chapter 391 hits. That is when we finally go to Ohara. And here is the thing about the Ohara flashback that makes it structurally perfect. We have spent almost 200 chapters with Robin at this point. We have seen her deadpan humour and her morbid observations and her quiet competence. We have formed an opinion of her. We think we understand her. And then Oda shows us an 8-year-old girl being rejected by her family, bullied by other children, finding solace only in the company of archaeologists who treat her like a human being for the first time in her life. He shows us the world government declaring that an island full of scholars is too dangerous to exist. He shows us the Buster Call. He shows us Robin's mother Olvia, who abandoned her daughter to pursue forbidden research, finally reuniting with Robin only to die in the same hour. He shows us Jaguar D. Saul, the giant who taught Robin to laugh, frozen solid by Aokiji while telling her to find friends who will protect her. He shows us a 9-year-old child running across a burning bridge, the only survivor of a genocide, carrying the weight of a destroyed civilization on her shoulders. The flashback lasts 7 chapters. Chapters 391 through 398 if you want to do your own research. And when it ends, when we return to the present timeline, and Robin screams that she wants to live, that she wants to go to sea with the Straw Hats, that declaration lands like a thunderclap because we finally understand what it costs her to say it. 20 years of running, 20 years of believing she was a demon child who brought death to everyone who helped her. 20 years of survival without living. And now she is choosing to live, choosing to trust, choosing to believe that these idiots in a pirate crew are different from everyone else who let her down. The placement made that moment. If Oda had shown us Ohara when Robin first appeared, we would have pitied her, but we would not have loved her yet. If he had waited until after Enies Lobby, the emotional climax would have already passed. But by holding the backstory until the exact moment when Robin was about to give up, when she needed a reason to fight, when the audience needed to understand why she was not fighting, he created a perfect storm of catharsis. The backstory does not just explain the character, It transforms the present scene into something unbearable and beautiful at the same time. Now let me show you how Oda refined this technique even further in Dressrosa. Trafalgar Law has been in the story since chapter 498. That is the Sabaody archipelago arc, for those keeping track. He shows up as one of the supernovas, looking edgy and intimidating with his nodachi and his tattoos and his unsettling calm. He saves Luffy's life at Marineford. He proposes the alliance to take down Kaido. And for hundreds of chapters, we know almost nothing about him. We know he has the Ope no Mi. We know he hates Doflamingo. We know he is planning something. But the details are fog. Dressrosa changes that. And notice where Oda places the Law flashback. It does not come at the beginning of the arc when Law and Doflamingo first confront each other. It does not come in the middle during some random battle. It comes in chapters 761 through 768, right when Law has been defeated. Right when he is bleeding out on the palace roof. Right when Doflamingo is about to kill him for good. That is when we go to Fleavance. Fleavance, the White City. A prosperous nation that mined a mineral called amber lead, which slowly poisoned the entire population while the world government and neighbouring countries knew and did nothing. When the disease finally manifested, when people started dying, the world did not send help. It quarantined the city and then destroyed it. Not because the disease was contagious. It was not contagious. The government knew it was not contagious. But the neighbouring countries were afraid. And fear is easier to manage when the thing you are afraid of no longer exists. So they killed everyone. Men, women, children, the sick and the healthy. Everyone. Law survived by hiding under a pile of corpses. He was 10 years old. That is not a backstory. That is a war crime presented in manga form, and the placement amplifies it. We are watching Law lose to Doflamingo in the present. We are watching him fail. And suddenly we understand that this is not just a fight over territory or pride. This is a man who lost everything trying to kill the person he blames for the one good thing that happened after his world ended. Corazon, Doflamingo's brother, the man who saved Law and gave him a reason to live, and Doflamingo murdered him. So Law has been waiting 13 years for this moment, and he is losing, and we feel every ounce of that loss because Oda made us wait too. 60% timing. I stand by the number. The content of a backstory gives it meaning, but the placement gives it impact. And fictional pirate creator man has been perfecting this craft for so long that he can make you cry on command by simply choosing when to let you see behind the curtain. So we have established that Oda knows when to deploy a backstory for maximum impact. But now we need to talk about what he puts inside those backstories. What is the payload? What is the specific type of trauma that fictional pirate creator man reaches for most often when he wants to make you ugly cry at an unreasonable hour? And the answer, if you have been paying any attention at all to this manga, is obvious. It is parents. It is always parents. One Piece has a parent mortality rate that would make child protective services shut down the entire world. I am not exaggerating. Let me run through the main cast real quick. Luffy's mother is unknown, and his father was absent for his entire childhood. Zoro's parents are never mentioned and presumed dead or irrelevant. Nami's biological parents died in a war, and her adoptive mother was executed in front of her. Usopp's mother died of illness when he was a child, and his father abandoned the family to be a pirate. Sanji's mother died from a drug overdose she took to save him from genetic modification. Chopper's parental figure Hiruluk died in a suicide bombing. Robin's mother abandoned her and then died in a genocide. Frankie's parents threw him off a ship, and his mentor was executed by the government. Brook's entire crew, which functioned as his family, died and left him alone for 50 years. Jinbei's father figure, Fisher Tiger, was killed by humans he refused to accept blood from. That is the Straw Hat Crew. That is supposed to be the fun adventure squad. And every single one of them has dead parents or parent figures baked into their origin story. This is not coincidence. This is not Oda being lazy and defaulting to the same trope. This is a deliberate strategy targeting the single most universal emotional vulnerability that exists in the human experience: the parental bond. Here is the thing about parents in fiction. Every single person watching this video has or had parents. Every single person has some relationship to the concept of parental love, whether that relationship is positive or negative or complicated or absent. When you kill a parent in a story, you are not just killing a character. You are activating a neural pathway that connects to the audience's own experiences with dependence, protection, loss, and the terrifying realization that the people who are supposed to keep you safe cannot always do so. Oda knows this. He has always known this, and he exploits it ruthlessly. Let me take you through the taxonomy. Because not all parental deaths in One Piece are created equal. There are patterns within the pattern. Subcategories of devastation that fictional pirate creator man deploys, depending on what specific flavor of heartbreak he wants to inflict. The first pattern is what I call the Bellemere archetype. This is the parent who chooses death over denying their child. Bellemere could have lived. Arlong gave her an out. Pay the tax for one person, claim you live alone, and let your kids hide. Simple survival math. But Bellemere looked at that fishman and told him she had 2 daughters, knowing full well what it would cost her. She chose to die as a mother rather than live as a stranger to her children. And that choice, that declaration of identity in the face of death, is what makes her death transcendent rather than just sad. She didn't die because she was weak. She died because her love was stronger than her survival instinct. Oda returns to this well constantly. Scarlet in Dressrosa takes a bullet meant for her daughter Rebecca and uses her last moments to tell Rebecca to keep smiling. Otohime in Fishman Island is assassinated in front of her children and uses her dying breaths to make them promise not to hate humans. The parent who dies affirming their love, transforming their death into a final lesson, a final gift, a weight the child will carry forever. It is devastating because it is beautiful, and it is beautiful because it is devastating. The second pattern is the Tom archetype. This is the parent figure who dies protecting not just a child, but an ideal. Tom the shipwright built the Oro Jackson, the ship that carried Roger to Laugh-Tale. When the world government came for him, they used his own creation, the Sea Train, as leverage. They framed him for an attack he did not commit. And Tom could have sold out Roger, could have given the government information, could have tried to bargain. Instead, he claimed the Oro Jackson with pride. He declared that a shipwright never denies the ships they build, no matter what those ships are used for. And then he was executed, taking the blame for a crime his apprentice Frankie accidentally enabled, dying with his philosophy intact. Tom's death taught Frankie what it means to stand by your creations. It taught him that shame is a choice. It gave him the burden of the Sea Train and the guilt of feeling responsible and the driving need to build something worthy of his mentor's legacy. That is the Tom archetype. The parent who dies for a principle, leaving the child to either uphold that principle or be crushed by it. The third pattern is the Hiruluk archetype. And this one is the most cruel because it involves hope. Hiruluk was a quack doctor on a winter island who adopted a reindeer that could transform into a humanish shape. He had an incurable disease. He had maybe days to live. And when Chopper, desperate to save him, brought him a poisonous mushroom, because a book said mushrooms with skulls on them could cure any illness. Hiruluk knew it was poison. He knew it would kill him faster than his disease, and he ate it anyway, with tears of gratitude in his eyes, because Chopper had tried to save him, and he would not reject that love, even if it killed him. Then he blew himself up in front of Wapel's castle so that his disease would not give Wapel the satisfaction of defeating him naturally. Cherry blossoms fell over the Drum Kingdom because Hiruluk had spent 30 years trying to prove that miracles exist, that a sick heart can be cured by beauty, that even a country frozen in despair can bloom again. He died a failure by every objective measure. His research never worked. His medicine never healed anyone. But he died believing, and that belief passed to Chopper like an inherited illness, a beautiful sickness called hope that Chopper has carried ever since. This is what Oda does with parents. He does not just kill them. He makes their deaths mean something. He loads those deaths with philosophy, with challenge, with legacy. Every dead parent in One Piece leaves behind a mission. Bellemere leaves Nami with the need to be free. Tom leaves Frankie with the need to build without shame. Hiruluk leaves Chopper with the need to cure the incurable. Ottoheim leaves her children with the need to bridge the gap between species. The parent dies, but the weight of their dreams transfers to the child, and now the child has to carry that weight for the rest of the story. And that, my fellow emotionally compromised internet dwellers, is why the parent problem is so effective. Because it is not just about loss. It is about inheritance. And inheritance is a burden that never goes away. Let me push this inheritance concept further, because I think it is the key to understanding why One Piece backstories hit different from other shonen manga. Other series kill parents too. Naruto's parents died. Ichigo's mother died. Goku's entire species died. Dead parents are practically a requirement for the protagonist application in this industry. But One Piece does something with those deaths that elevates them beyond mere tragedy. It makes them transactional. When a parent or mentor dies in One Piece, they do not just leave behind grief. They leave behind homework. They leave behind a to-do list that the survivor did not ask for, did not agree to, and cannot refuse without betraying the memory of the person they lost. This is the inherited will, and Oda has built his entire thematic framework around it. The will of D. The dreams passed from Roger to Luffy. The promise of the dawn that Odin made, and the scabbards have waited 20 years to fulfill. Every major player in this story is carrying someone else's dream on their back, and they cannot put it down. They are not allowed to put it down, because putting it down would mean the person who died for nothing. Think about what that does to a character psychologically. You are not just mourning, you are obligated. Your grief comes with terms and conditions. And if you fail, you are not just failing yourself, you are failing the dead. You are proving that their sacrifice was worthless. That is an unbearable weight, and Oda drops it on his characters constantly. Let me give you the clearest example. Kozuki Oden dies in chapter 972, boiled alive in oil while holding his retainers above his head so they can survive. His last words are a command. Open Wano's borders. Find Joy Boy. Laugh at the dawn. And then he dies, and the scabbards scatter, and 20 years pass with those words hanging over everything they do. Kinnaman spent 2 decades pretending to be stupider than he is because the mission required stealth. Kanjuro spent 2 decades pretending to be loyal while secretly working for the enemy. And honestly, that is a different kind of tragedy we will get to later. Ashura Doji spent 20 years as a bandit, hating himself for giving up hope. Denjiro spent 20 years as Kyoshiro, so deep undercover that he had to watch Orochi desecrate everything Oden built and do nothing. 20 years. That is not a backstory. That is a prison sentence served in honor of a dead man's dream. And when the scabbards finally get their chance to fight Kaido, when they finally get to attempt what Oden could not finish, they do it knowing that failure means all 20 years were wasted. Every compromise, every humiliation, every moment they spent not living their own lives because they were too busy preserving Oden's will. If they lose, all of it becomes meaningless. That is the mathematics of inherited will. You are gambling not just your future, but your past. Now let me show you how this plays out on a smaller scale with Fisher Tiger, because his story demonstrates the cruelest version of this trope. Fisher Tiger was a slave. He climbed the red line with his bare hands, broke into Mariéjois, and freed every slave he could find regardless of species. He founded the Sun Pirates. He gave former slaves a new identity by branding over their hoof marks with a sun symbol so no one could tell who had been property and who had not. He was a revolutionary, a liberator, a legend. And he died because he refused a blood transfusion from humans. The wound itself was survivable. Aladdin, the ship's doctor, told him that human blood could save him. But Fisher Tiger had seen too much. He had suffered too much. The hatred had gotten into his blood even though he preached coexistence. So he refused the transfusion and bled out on the deck of his own ship, confessing to his crew that he could not stop hating humans no matter how hard he tried, and begging them to break the cycle. "Do not tell anyone how I died," he said. "Do not let my hatred become your inheritance. Tell the children that humans and fishmen can live together." And then he died, and Jinbei inherited that will. The will to pursue coexistence. The will to suppress rage. The will to believe in a future that Fisher Tiger himself could not reach. For decades, Jinbei has been carrying that burden, trying to be the fishman that Fisher Tiger wanted to be but could not become. And here is the cruel part. Jinbei knows that the dream was aspirational, not achievable by the man who dreamed it. He knows Fisher Tiger died a hypocrite. He loves him anyway. He carries the dream anyway. Because what else can you do when someone dies giving you a mission? You either accept it or you let their death mean nothing. This is the inherited will trauma model in its purest form. The person who dies is not passing on a gift. They are passing on a debt of meaning, a debt of continuation. And the survivor has to spend the rest of their life making payments on something they never signed up for. Luffy carries Roger's will, even though he never met the man. He carries Ace's will after Marineford. He carries the weight of everyone who believed in him, everyone who died so he could keep moving forward. When Luffy finally reaches Laugh Tale, when he finally learns what the One Piece is, he will not be achieving his dream. He will be completing an assignment given to him by a dead king he never knew, passed down through Shanks, through Rayleigh, through a chain of inheritance that stretches back to the Void Century itself. That is not freedom. That is destiny wearing freedom's clothes. And Oda has been setting this up since chapter 1. The brilliance of it is that Luffy does not seem burdened. He laughs, he eats meat, he punches bad guys and moves on to the next island. But the narrative knows what he is carrying, even if his personality does not show the weight. And when we finally learn what Joy Boy could not accomplish, when we finally understand what Luffy has inherited, I suspect the weight will become visible. I suspect we will look back at every smile and realise it was load-bearing. That is the difference between One Piece and other shonen. In Naruto, becoming Hokage is Naruto's dream. In One Piece, becoming Pirate King is Roger's dream wearing Luffy's face. The inherited will is baked so deeply into the structure that you cannot separate the characters from the debts they carry. And that is why the backstories hit so hard. They are not just explaining why a character is sad. They are explaining what the character owes, and to whom, and why they can never stop paying. And now we arrive at the technique that proves Eiichiro Oda is not just a storyteller, but an emotional war criminal operating without oversight. We have talked about timing. We have talked about parents. We have talked about inherited will. But none of that prepares you for the specific cruelty of what I call the smile through tears paradox. This is the moment when a character is dying, when everything is falling apart, when the person watching them die is breaking into pieces, and the dying character smiles. They smile, and they say something kind. They comfort the living. They give permission to move on. And that smile destroys you more completely than any scream or curse or expression of agony ever could. This is Oda's finishing move. This is the technique he deploys when he wants to ensure you will never recover. And I need you to understand why it works so effectively, because once you see the mechanism, you will recognize it every single time, and it will still devastate you anyway. The smile inverts the expected emotional dynamic. When someone dies, we expect them to be the victim. We expect them to need comfort. We expect the grief to flow toward them. But when the dying person smiles, when they use their final moments to reassure the survivor, they flip the script. Suddenly the dying person is the strong one. Suddenly the survivor is the one who needs help. And that inversion creates a specific kind of anguish that has no outlet. You cannot comfort someone who is comforting you. You cannot save someone who has already made peace with not being saved. The smile closes the door on rescue and opens a door to guilt that will never fully shut. Let me walk you through the canonical examples, because fictional pirate creator man has done this so many times that it constitutes a pattern of behavior. Corazon, Don Quixote Rocinante. The man spent his entire adult life as a spy in his own brother's organization, pretending to be a heartless killer while secretly working for the Marines. He found Law, a 13-year-old dying of amber-lead poisoning, consumed by hatred and despair, and he decided that saving this one child was worth more than his mission, his cover, and his life. He carried Law across the North Blue, searching for a cure. He endured failure after failure. He stole the Ope-Yope No Me and force-fed it to Law, even though Law did not want to live. And when Doflamingo finally caught up to them, when Rocinante was bleeding out in that treasure chest while Law hid inside, he smiled. He told Law he loved him. He used his soundproof powers to muffle Law's crying, so his brother would not find the boy. And then he died, smiling, silent, having given everything for a child he had known for less than a year. That smile broke Law. It broke him so thoroughly that he spent the next 13 years plotting revenge. Not because he hated Doflamingo, although he did, but because that smile demanded meaning. Corazon died happy. Corazon died believing Law would live and be free. And Law could not let that belief be wrong. The smile was not just comfort. It was a command. Live. Be happy. Make my death worth something. That is the weight the smile carries. Bellamere smiled too. Standing in front of Arlong with a rifle to her head, knowing she was about to die, she looked at Nami and Nojiko and told them she loved them. She apologized for not being able to do more. And then she smiled, because she wanted her daughter's last memory of their mother to be a face full of love, rather than fear. That smile haunted Nami for 8 years. Every time she drew a map for Arlong, every time she counted money toward a freedom she might never achieve, she saw that smile. The smile said, "I chose this." The smile said, "You are worth dying for." And what do you do with that? How do you live with being someone's reason to die? Hirulux smiled when he ate the poisonous mushroom. He knew it would kill him. He knew Chopper had made a mistake. But Chopper had climbed a mountain and fought a guardian and risked everything to find that mushroom because he wanted to save his father figure. So Hiruluk ate it with tears of joy, praising Chopper for his effort, because rejecting the gift would have meant rejecting the love behind it. The smile said your intention matters more than the outcome. The smile said, I am proud of you, even though this will kill me. And Chopper has carried that smile into every medical crisis since. He became a doctor who will find a cure for any disease because Hiruluk smiled at poison and called it a miracle. Even Goldie Roger smiled. The Pirate King himself, about to be executed in Logetown, asked what he did with his treasure by a man in the crowd, and he grinned like a maniac and told the world to go find it. He turned his execution into an invitation. He turned his death into the starting gun for an entire era. That smile launched 1,000 pirate crews. That smile sent Luffy's generation to sea. Roger could have died cursing the world government. He could have died screaming defiance. Instead, he smiled and gave the world a gift wrapped in his own death. The will of D indeed. This is the paradox. The smile should make the death easier. It should provide closure. The dying person is at peace, so we should be at peace too. But it does not work that way. The smile makes the death worse because it makes the dying person noble. It elevates their sacrifice. It transforms them from victim to martyr. And martyrs are impossible to mourn cleanly. You cannot just be sad that they are gone. You have to reckon with what their death meant, what it demands from you, whether you are worthy of the smile they gave you. Oda understands this. He understands that a scream of pain fades from memory, but a smile at the moment of death burns itself into the survivor's soul forever. So, he keeps doing it. He keeps having his characters die with grace and love and that devastating, impossible smile. And we keep watching, and we keep crying, and we keep coming back for more because the smile is not just sad, it is beautiful. And beauty is the cruelest weapon of all. That is the anatomy of tears. That is how fictional pirate creator man builds his backstories. Timing, parents, inheritance, and the smile that makes it all unbearable. In the next saga, we are going to take these principles and apply them to specific cases. We are going to go panel by panel through the most devastating backstories in the series and see exactly how Oda assembles his emotional ordnance. Bring tissues. You are going to need them. We talked about Robin's backstory earlier in terms of structure, in terms of placement and timing. But now we are going to do something different. Now we are going to crack open the actual content of what happened on Ohara and examine it like the emotional crime scene it is. Because here is the hot take I need you to sit with for this section. Robin's backstory is not devastating because her mother died. Lots of mothers die in One Piece. We have established this. Mothers in this manga have a life expectancy roughly equivalent to a mayfly in a hurricane. No, Robin's backstory is devastating because of something far more specific and far more cruel. She got 8 seconds of being loved before the world ended. Let me take you through the timeline because the timeline is where the real horror lives. Robin was born on Ohara to Nico Olvia, an archaeologist obsessed with uncovering the true history. Before Robin could form lasting memories of her mother, Olvia left the island to pursue her research. She left her daughter with her brother's family, the same family that would spend the next several years treating Robin like a burden, like an inconvenience, like the embarrassing relative you hide when guests come over. Robin's aunt fed her scraps. The children of the island threw rocks at her and called her a monster because she ate a devil fruit, and could sprout hands from surfaces. She was isolated, rejected, and alone from the moment she was old enough to understand what alone meant. Chapter 391 shows us this childhood in devastating detail. There is a panel of young Robin sitting by herself while other children play in the background. There is a panel of her aunt telling her she is not welcome at family meals. There is a panel of Robin crying and asking what she did wrong, and no one answers because there is no answer. She did nothing wrong. She simply existed in a way that made people uncomfortable. The devil fruit, the absent mother, the association with the scholars who were studying things the world government did not want studied. Robin was guilty by proximity to forbidden knowledge before she ever read a single poneglyph herself. The only people who treated her like a human being were the archaeologists of the Tree of Knowledge. Professor Clover and his colleagues saw a brilliant child being wasted by neglect, and they took her in. They taught her to read. They taught her to think. They taught her that the past matters, that history is not just dates and names, but the story of who we are and why the world looks the way it does. By the age of 8, Robin had passed the archaeology exam and earned the right to study the poneglyphs. She had found a family that wanted her. She had found purpose. And then her mother came back. This is where fictional pirate creator man twists the knife with surgical precision. Olvia returns to Ohara in chapter 393, but she does not return triumphant. She returns as a fugitive. The world government captured her research vessel and executed her colleagues. She escaped only to warn Ohara that the government knows what they have been studying. She arrives knowing she has brought death to her homeland, knowing she has maybe hours before the Buster Call arrives. Robin finds her mother in the Tree of Knowledge. She has waited her entire life for this moment. She has dreamed about what she would say, how Olvia would explain everything, how they would finally be a family. And Olvia, seeing her daughter for the first time in 6 years, denies her. She claims she has no daughter. She tells Robin to leave, because Olvia knows what is coming, and she knows the only way to save Robin is to make Robin run. Let that sink in. Robin spends years being rejected by people who should have loved her. She finally meets the one person who was supposed to love her unconditionally, and that person rejects her too. For good reasons, yes. For survival reasons. But an 8-year-old does not understand strategic rejection. An 8-year-old just knows that her mother looked at her and said, "No." The Buster Call comes. The world government deploys 5 vice admirals and 10 battleships to eradicate a single island of scholars. The justification is that Ohara is studying the poneglyphs, which is a crime punishable by death. The truth is that the government is terrified of what the poneglyphs might reveal. So they burn the Tree of Knowledge. They sink the evacuation ships. They kill everyone, civilian and scholar alike, because dead men tell no tales and dead islands ask no questions. In the middle of this apocalypse, Olvia finds Robin one final time. The scholars are throwing books into the lake to preserve knowledge even as they die. The island is on fire. Marines are executing survivors. And Olvia, bleeding, dying, holds her daughter for the first and last time. She tells Robin she loves her. She tells Robin she is sorry. She tells Robin to live, to find friends who will protect her, to carry on even though everything is ending. 8 seconds. Maybe 10. That is how long Robin gets to be held by her mother. That is how long she gets to hear the words she has waited her entire life to hear. After 6 years of abandonment and 8 years of rejection, Robin receives approximately 8 seconds of unconditional maternal love, and then her mother goes back to the burning library to die with her colleagues. This is the cruelty that makes Robin's backstory transcendent. It is not the scale of the tragedy, although a government-sanctioned genocide is certainly large-scale. It is the specificity of what was taken. Robin was not denied a mother's love entirely. That would almost be easier. She was given a taste, a single, perfect moment, and then it was ripped away forever. She knows what she lost, because she experienced it just long enough to understand what she had been missing. Saul tells her to laugh. Saul, the defecting giant who helped her escape, freezes to death, telling Robin that she will find friends someday, that the sea is vast and somewhere out there are people who will love her. Derashishi. His laugh becomes her inheritance. But the damage is done. Robin spends the next 20 years trusting no one, joining and abandoning organisation after organisation, because she learned at age 8 that attachment ends in fire. Everyone who loved her died. The scholars died. Saul died. Olvia died. O'Hara itself died. Robin survived only by being alone, and she made loneliness into a survival strategy that took 2 decades to break. When she screams that she wants to live at Enia's lobby, she is not just asking to survive. She is asking to finally believe that she deserves those 8 seconds, that the love was real, that somewhere, somehow, she is allowed to be held without the world burning down around her. 8 seconds. That is all it took to break her. And that is all it took to make us never forget her. I need to talk about something that has been bothering me ever since I first read the Dressrosa flashback. I need to talk about how Eiichiro Oda, the man who draws funny pirates and rubber boys punching things, casually inserted a full-scale ethnic cleansing into his manga, and the fandom just kind of accepted it and moved on. Because Fleevance is not a sad backstory. Fleevance is a war crime. Fleevance is what happens when systemic greed meets systemic cowardice meets systemic murder. And Oda wrote it into One Piece canon with the same pen he uses to draw Luffy making stupid faces. Fictional pirate creator man really sat at his desk and said, yes, today I will depict the complete extermination of a population for profit and make it a pirate's origin story. And then he did it. And it is one of the most horrifying things I have ever read in a shonen magazine. Let me tell you about Amber Lead. Amber Lead was a mineral unique to the nation of Fleevance. It was beautiful, pale white, and extraordinarily valuable. The entire country built its economy around mining and exporting this substance. The world government knew about Fleevance. The neighbouring countries knew about Fleevance. Everyone traded with Fleevance because Amber Lead was profitable and pretty, and nobody asked too many questions about where it came from or what it might be doing to the people who extracted it. Here is what they knew and did not tell anyone. Amber Lead is poisonous. Not immediately, not obviously. But the substance accumulates in the human body over time, and, more importantly, it accumulates across generations. Parents pass the contamination to their children. Each generation starts with a higher baseline of poison than the last. The world government's own researchers documented this. They knew that Fleevance was slowly dying, that the people mining their precious white ore were poisoning themselves and their descendants with every shovelful. And they said nothing. They kept buying. They kept profiting. They let an entire nation march toward extinction because the money was too good to ask uncomfortable questions. The disease manifested as white patches on the skin. They called it Amber Lead syndrome. When the people of Fleevance started showing symptoms, when children started dying of a disease that turned them pale and then killed them, the neighbouring countries did not send doctors. They did not send aid. They panicked. They saw the white skin and assumed it was contagious. It was not contagious. The world government knew it was not contagious. But correcting the misconception would have meant admitting they knew the ore was dangerous all along. So they stayed silent. And the neighbours, terrified of a plague that did not exist, decided the safest course of action was to make sure no one from Flevance ever left. They sealed the borders. They quarantined an entire nation. And when the people of Flevance tried to escape, tried to flee the death sentence their own land had become, the neighbouring countries killed them. Not arrested, killed, shot them at the borders, burned their ships, treated refugees like infected animals that needed to be put down. Trafalgar Law was 10 years old when his country died. Chapter 762 shows us what that looked like. His father was a doctor who understood that Amber-Lead syndrome was not contagious, who tried to tell people, who begged for reason and was ignored. His mother was kind. His sister Lamy was younger than him and sick and scared, and none of that mattered because the soldiers did not care who was symptomatic and who was not. They were cleansing. They were sanitizing. They were making sure the problem of Flevance would never spread by making sure no one from Flevance survived to spread anything. Law's parents died. His sister died. His teachers died. His friends died. The hospital where his father worked, full of sick children and desperate families, was set on fire with people still inside. Law watched his sister burn. Let me say that again because I need you to understand what Oda put in this manga. Trafalgar Law, beloved supernova, fan favourite character, cool sword guy with the funny hat, watched his little sister burn to death in a hospital fire set by soldiers who knew she was not contagious and killed her anyway. He escaped by hiding under corpses. A 10-year-old boy crawled beneath a pile of dead bodies and pretended to be one of them while soldiers walked overhead looking for survivors to execute. He stayed there, surrounded by the dead, covered in their blood, listening to the sounds of his nation being erased. And then he crawled out of the pile and walked out of Flevance and into a world that had collectively decided his people deserved to die. This is the part that breaks me every time I think about it. The world forgot. That is the final cruelty of Flevance. The genocide happened, and then the world moved on, and within a generation nobody talked about it anymore. When Law shows his white spots to people in the present timeline, they do not recognise the disease. They do not know what Flevance was. An entire nation was exterminated, and the historical record just kinda shrugged and let it fade. Oda is making a point here about how atrocities become footnotes, about how the victims of systemic violence are erased twice, first by the violence and then by the forgetting. Law carries Flevance in his body. The poison's still technically there, even if the Ope no Mi saved him from dying of it. And nobody around him even remembers that his home existed. The hot take I want to leave you with is this. Law's backstory is not sad because he lost his family. Losing family is terrible, but it is a personal tragedy. Law's backstory is devastating because it is political. Because the deaths were not natural or accidental, or even the result of a single villain's cruelty. They were the logical outcome of systems working as designed. Governments prioritizing profit over people. Populations choosing fear over compassion. Bureaucracies deciding that some lives are acceptable losses. Flevance died because that was easier than admitting fault. And Law survived to carry the memory of a nation that nobody else will remember. When Law says he wants to destroy Doflamingo, when he says he has been planning this for 13 years, he is not being dramatic. He is being precise. Doflamingo took Corazon from him, yes, and that is personal. But Doflamingo also represents everything Flevance taught Law about the world. The strong take, the weak die, the governments lie, and nobody cares unless you make them care. Law's entire philosophy, his cynicism, his distance, his refusal to trust, all of it traces back to that pile of corpses. All of it traces back to being 10 years old and learning that the world will watch you die and call it pest control. Fictional pirate creator man wrote a genocide into his funny pirate manga. And somehow, that is not even the darkest backstory we are going to cover today. Here is what Oda did with Sanji, and I need you to appreciate the sheer audacity of it, because nothing else in One Piece demonstrates his long-term planning quite like this. For over 800 chapters, Sanji was the funny cook. He was the leg-based fighter with the heart-shaped eyes who went insane over beautiful women. He had a gag where nosebleeds nearly killed him. He had a running bit where he fought with Zoro constantly. He was comic relief wrapped in a black suit, and yes, we knew his backstory with Zeph. We knew about the Baratie, and the starvation on the rock, and the old man who ate his own leg to keep a child alive. That was sad. That was formative. But it felt complete. Sanji had a tragic past, and he overcame it. And now he cooks for his friends. Story done. Character resolved. And then Whole Cake Island happened, and Oda revealed that actually, no, we knew nothing. We knew the second tragedy. The warm one. The one with a happy ending. We did not know about the first tragedy. The one that made Sanji need Zeph in the first place. The one that explains why a boy was alone on a cruise ship in the East Blue far from his homeland. The one that recontextualizes every single joke and every single fight and every single moment of Sanji's character into something much darker. Sanji is a Vinsmoke. His full name is Vinsmoke Sanji, and he is the third son of Judge Vinsmoke, king of the Germa Kingdom, commander of the clone army Germa 66, and one of the worst fathers in a manga absolutely overflowing with terrible fathers. Judge did not want children. Judge wanted weapons. He wanted genetically enhanced super soldiers who would help him reconquer the North Blue and restore Germa to its former glory. So he experimented on his own wife while she was pregnant with quadruplets, modifying the fetuses to remove their emotions and enhance their physical abilities. Stronger, faster, unable to feel compassion or mercy or any of the weaknesses that make humans hesitate. Sora, Sanji's mother, found out what Judge was doing, and because she was not a monster, because she understood that emotionless children would be weapons rather than people, she took a drug to counteract the modifications. The drug worked on one of the four. It worked on Sanji. But the drug was dangerous, borderline fatal, and Sora's health never recovered. She spent the rest of her short life bedridden, slowly dying from the choice she made to give her son a soul. So Sanji was born human in a family of post-human soldiers. He could feel. He could cry. He could not fight as well as his brothers, or run as fast, or take as much damage. And in the Vinsmoke household, that made him worthless. Chapter 833 shows us what worthless looked like. His brothers Ichiji, Niji and Yonji beat him constantly. They called him a failure. They mocked him for crying, for caring, for being weak. His sister Reiju watched and did nothing, or sometimes patched him up afterward, but never intervened when it mattered. And Judge, the father who should have protected him, the man whose genetic tampering created this situation in the first place, looked at Sanji and saw only disappointment. There is a panel in chapter 833 that I think about constantly. Sanji, maybe 6 years old, brings Judge a plate of food he cooked. He is smiling. He wants his father's approval. He made something and he is proud of it, and he wants his dad to be proud too. And Judge looks at the food and looks at his son, and his face twists into disgust. He asks why Sanji is wasting time on commoner's work. He tells Sanji that cooking is beneath a prince. He tells Sanji that everything about him is a failure and a humiliation. And Sanji's smile dies on his face. That is the moment that created the Sanji we know, not the starvation with Zeph. This, a child wanting love and being told he was garbage for wanting it. a child whose only crime was being human surrounded by people who thought humanity was a defect. Judge eventually got tired of being reminded that his experiment failed. So he faked Sanji's death, put an iron mask on the boy's face, and locked him in a dungeon. Let me repeat that. A father put a mask on his child's face so no one would know the child existed and locked him in a cell because the child's existence was embarrassing. Sanji was maybe 7. He spent months in that cell, fed through a slot, forgotten by everyone except the rats. When Reiju finally helped him escape, when she broke the bars and told him to run and never come back, Sanji fled to the East Blue and somehow ended up on the cruise ship where he would eventually meet Zeph. This recontextualizes everything. Sanji's obsession with feeding people is not just because Zeph taught him to cook. It is because he once made food for his father and was told it was worthless. Every meal Sanji makes is a defiance. Every plate he serves is proof that the thing Judge called shameful is actually beautiful. Sanji's refusal to let anyone go hungry, even enemies, even people who do not deserve his kindness, traces back to a dungeon where a child was fed scraps through a slot like an animal. His inability to hit women, which the fandom has debated endlessly as a character flaw, makes different sense when you realize his mother died to save his humanity, and his sister was the only one who showed him kindness. Women in Sanji's formative experience were the only ones who did not try to destroy him. That is not a rational policy. It is trauma calcified into a rule. And here is the thing that makes Whole Cake Island so devastating. Sanji goes back. He goes back to the family that tortured him because Big Mum has Zeph hostage, and he cannot let his real father die. He puts on the raid suit. He sits at the table with the brothers who beat him. He prepares to marry a woman he has never met to protect the people he actually loves. And Judge, who has not changed at all, who still sees Sanji as a failure, has the audacity to be surprised when Sanji shows emotion. The man who threw his son away is confused that his son is not grateful to be retrieved. The climax of Sanji's arc in that saga is not a fight. It is a meal. Luffy refuses to eat anyone's cooking except Sanji's. He sits in the rain, starving, beaten, and waits until Sanji comes back. And when Sanji finally breaks down, finally admits that he wants to go back to the Sunny, that he wants to cook for his crew, that he has been pretending to be strong when really he is terrified, Luffy tells him what he needed to hear. "I cannot become Pirate King without you. You are not worthless. You are necessary. You are wanted." That is the anti-Judge moment. That is Oda giving Sanji the father he deserved through the captain he chose. And it lands because we spent 800 chapters not knowing how much Sanji needed to hear it. Everything we have discussed so far has been sprawling. Ohara took 7 chapters. Flevance took 8. Sanji's Germa nightmare unfolded across an entire arc. These are backstories with room to breathe, with space to build, with panels dedicated to establishing atmosphere and context and the slow accumulation of tragedy. And then there is Senior Pink, a man Oda made us weep over in approximately 20 pages, proving that fictional pirate creator man does not need length to destroy you. He just needs precision. Let me set the stage for how absurd this is. Senior Pink is a minor antagonist in the Dressrosa arc. He works for Doflamingo. He fights Frankie. His entire gimmick, the thing that defines him visually and comedically, is that he is a grown man dressed as a baby. Bonnet, pacifier, diaper over his suit, the whole ensemble. When he first appears, he is a joke. He is a weird design choice that makes you wonder what Oda was thinking. Women in Dressrosa throw themselves at him because he is so hard-boiled, which seems like a non sequitur, and the whole thing plays as absurdist comedy in the middle of a war arc. And then chapter 775 happens. And suddenly you understand everything. And suddenly you are crying over a man in a diaper because Oda cannot help himself. Pink's real name is Senor Pink. And before he was a pirate, before he worked for Doflamingo, he was just a man who fell in love. Her name was Russian. She was kind and gentle, and she hated pirates. She hated them so much that Pink lied to her about what he did for a living. He told her he was a banker. He married her as a banker. They had a son together, a boy named Gimlet, and for a while Pink had everything. A wife who loved him, a child who needed him, a double life that was working. Then Gimlet got sick. Then Gimlet died. Their son died while Pink was away on a job, doing the pirate work he had been hiding, and he was not there. Russian was alone when it happened. She had to bury their child without the man she thought was a banker coming home from his bank job. And when Pink finally returned, when he saw what had happened, when he tried to comfort his wife, Russian asked him where he had been. She asked why he had not come. And Pink, destroyed by guilt, finally told her the truth. He was a pirate. He had always been a pirate. Everything she thought she knew about him was a lie. Russian left. She walked out into a rainstorm, devastated by grief and betrayal, and she slipped and fell and hit her head. The injury put her in a coma, a permanent one. She would never wake up. She would never speak again. She would lie in that bed for the rest of her life, unresponsive, unreachable, a living reminder of everything Pink had destroyed. This is where the baby clothes come in. Pink visited her every day. He talked to her even though she could not hear him. He begged for forgiveness, even though she could not grant it. And nothing worked. She lay there, motionless, expressionless, a body without a person inside it. Until one day, on a whim, on a desperate, stupid whim, Pink brought Gimlet's baby clothes to the hospital. He put on the bonnet as a joke, as a pathetic attempt to reach her, and Russian smiled. She smiled. For the first time since the coma. Her face, which had been slack and empty, curved into a smile when she saw her husband dressed like their dead son. Maybe some part of her remembered Gimlet. Maybe some part of her found comfort in the image. Maybe it was just a reflex, a random firing of neurons that meant nothing at all. It does not matter. Pink saw that smile, and he made a decision. If dressing like a baby made Russian smile, he would dress like a baby forever. He would wear the bonnet and the pacifier every single day, in public, in battle, in front of his crewmates and his enemies and anyone else who wanted to laugh. Because making Russian smile was the only thing he could still do for her. It was the only way he could still be her husband. That is why Senior Pink dresses like a baby. That is the punchline to a joke that stopped being funny 3 paragraphs ago. Oda gives us this entire backstory in pieces across maybe 20 pages total. He does not linger. He does not give us chapters of Pink and Russian being happy together. He does not show us Gimlet growing up. He gives us the minimum necessary context, and then he gives us the tragedy, and then he gives us the baby clothes, and the math does itself. We fill in the gaps. We imagine the happy marriage that must have existed. We imagine the grief of losing a child. We imagine the guilt of being exposed as a liar at the worst possible moment. Oda trusts us to do the emotional work. And because we do the work ourselves, the conclusion hits harder than if he had spelled everything out. This is the economy of devastating storytelling. Fictional pirate creator man understands that sometimes less is more. Sometimes a single image, a man in a bonnet sitting next to a comatose woman, contains more emotional information than 100 panels of explicit tragedy. The baby clothes are a symbol, and symbols compress meaning. Every time we see Pink in that ridiculous outfit, we are not seeing a joke anymore. We are seeing a man who gave up his dignity to make his wife smile one more time. We are seeing love that has nowhere to go except into absurdity. We are seeing grief that cannot heal because the person who could forgive him is gone in every way that matters. And here is the thing that elevates this from sad to unbearable. Pink knows it might not mean anything. He knows Russian might not actually recognize him. He knows the smile could be random, could be meaningless, could be his desperate brain seeing patterns that are not there. He does it anyway. He dresses like a baby every single day on the chance that somewhere in that unresponsive body, some fragment of his wife is comforted by the sight. That is not logical. That is not rational. That is love operating beyond the boundaries of sense. And it is one of the most human things Oda has ever written. Frankie, the man fighting Pink, understands this. Their battle becomes less about winning and more about respect. Two men who have both lost everything, who have both rebuilt themselves around their grief, punching each other until one of them falls down. When Frankie wins, he does not mock Pink. He calls him hard-boiled. He acknowledges that the man in the diaper has more steel in him than most people will ever possess. 20 pages. That is all Oda needed. 20 pages to take a visual gag and turn it into one of the most quietly devastating love stories in the entire manga. And if that does not prove what I've been saying about fictional pirate creator man's precision, about his understanding of emotional architecture, about his ability to make you care about anyone if he wants to, then I do not know what will. We have spent this entire saga examining individual backstories, looking at how Oda constructs singular tragedies for singular characters. But now, I want to show you something different. I want to show you what happens when fictional pirate creator man takes the same tragedy, applies it to two people, and lets us watch them diverge into completely opposite human beings. Because the Don Quixote brothers are not just two characters with sad pasts. They are a controlled experiment in trauma response. They are proof that suffering does not determine who you become. Choice does. Don Quixote do Flamingo and Don Quixote Rocinante were born as celestial dragons. Let that sink in for a moment. The main villain of Dressrosa, one of the cruelest characters in the entire series, the man who turned a kingdom into a puppet show and laughed while children were turned into toys, was born into the highest privilege the One Piece world offers. He was born a god. He was born into a family that could do anything to anyone without consequence, that could buy and sell human beings, that breathed different air than the rest of humanity because they believed themselves too sacred to share an atmosphere with commoners. And then his father Homing made a choice. Chapter 763 shows us what happened. Homing, unlike most celestial dragons, had a conscience. He looked at the suffering his family's status caused, and he felt something other than satisfaction. He felt guilt. He wanted to live among normal people, to prove that celestial dragons could be human, to give his sons a different kind of life. So he renounced his status. He took his wife and his two boys, and he left Marie-Joie and descended to the world below. The world did not welcome them. Here is what Homing did not understand, what his sheltered, privileged existence had not prepared him for. The people below did not see a reformed noble trying to make amends. They saw a celestial dragon. They saw one of the monsters who had oppressed them for centuries, now suddenly vulnerable, suddenly within reach. 800 years of rage does not care about individual redemption. 800 years of suffering does not pause to evaluate whether this particular god is sorry. They burned the Don Quixote mansion. They chased the family through the streets. They beat Homing. They strung up the children. Doflamingo and Rocinante, maybe 8 and 6 years old, were tied to a wall while a mob screamed for their blood. Their mother died from illness, exacerbated by the conditions they were forced into. Their father begged the celestial dragons in Marijua to take them back, to save his children, and the celestial dragons refused. Once you leave, you do not return. The gods do not take back their fallen. This is the shared trauma. Both brothers experienced the same fall. Both brothers lost their mother. Both brothers were hunted and tortured for sins they did not personally commit. Both brothers learned, in the most brutal way possible, that the world is cruel, and that status is the only protection against that cruelty. And here is where they diverge. There is a moment in chapter 763 that I believe is the most important panel in Doflamingo's entire backstory. The family is starving. They are hiding in a garbage heap, eating scraps, trying to survive. Homing is broken. The children are desperate. And an old man finds them. A normal person. Not a revolutionary or a marine or anyone special. Just an old man who sees a family suffering. He does not know they are former celestial dragons. He just sees hungry children. And he gives them food. Rocinante remembers this. He remembers that even in the worst moment of his life, a stranger showed kindness. He remembers that cruelty is not universal, that some people help even when they have no reason to, that the world contains grace alongside its brutality. This memory becomes the foundation of who he is. When he grows up, when he becomes a marine, when he infiltrates his own brother's crew to bring Doflamingo down, he is still the boy who remembers the old man with the food. He believes people can be good because he saw it. Doflamingo does not remember the old man. Or if he does not let it matter. What Doflamingo remembers is the mob. What Doflamingo remembers is the burning and the beating and the screaming, and the moment he realized that the only crime his family committed was losing power. He concludes that the world is a hierarchy of violence, that the strong dominate and the weak suffer, and that anyone who pretends otherwise is either lying or about to be victimized. He awakens Conqueror's Heiki at age 10, overwhelmed by rage, and he decides that he will never be weak again. He will claw his way back to godhood, even if he has to build a throne out of corpses. Same tragedy, same parents, same fall from grace. One brother becomes a saint, and one becomes a monster. And the only difference that matters is which part of the experience they chose to define themselves by. Oda is making a philosophical argument here, and it is not subtle. He is saying that trauma does not excuse evil. He is saying that suffering can produce compassion just as easily as it produces cruelty. Doflamingo had every opportunity to be like Rocinante. He saw the same kindness. He had the same brother trying to pull him toward the light. He chose the dark anyway. Not because he had to, because he wanted to. Because rage felt better than grief, and power felt better than vulnerability. And it was easier to become the thing he hated than to heal from what that thing did to him. Rocinante dies trying to save Law. We covered his smile in an earlier section, and I will not repeat the details because we have a forbidden list to respect. But I want to add something here about what his death means in context of the brother dynamic. Rocinante spends his adult life trying to stop Doflamingo. He infiltrates the crew. He feeds information to the Marines. He sabotages operations from the inside. And when he finds Law, when he sees a child consumed by the same kind of rage that swallowed his brother, he makes a choice. He chooses to save this one kid instead of completing his mission. He chooses love over duty. He chooses to prove, with his own life, that the old man with the food was right. That kindness matters. That one person helping another person is worth more than all the strategic victories in the world. Doflamingo kills him for it. Brother kills brother. The saint dies, and the monster lives, and there is no justice in it at all. But Rocinante's death creates law, creates the surgeon who will eventually help bring Doflamingo down, creates a living testament to the idea that compassion is not weakness. The Don Quixote bloodline ends with Doflamingo's defeat, but Rocinante's will continues through the boy he saved. That is the tragedy of the Don Quixote brothers. Not that they suffered, but that they suffered identically and became opposites. The same fire forged a weapon and a shield, and only one of them is still standing. We have now spent 2 full sagas examining how Oda constructs his backstories. We understand the timing. We understand the parental deaths. We understand the inherited will and the smile through tears and all the other tools in fictional pirate creator man's arsenal of emotional destruction. But now I want to do something potentially inadvisable. I want to rank them. I want to create a framework for determining which backstories are objectively the most devastating. And I need you to understand that I know how insane that sounds. Ranking fictional trauma feels wrong. It feels reductive. It feels like something a person with too much time and not enough healthy coping mechanisms would do. And yet, here we are, because this is the kind of channel this is, and you clicked on a 3-hour video about sad pirates, so we are both complicit in whatever happens next. The problem with ranking backstories intuitively is that intuition is subjective. Some people cry harder at Chopper's story than Robin's. Some people find Law's tragedy more affecting than Sanji's. Personal experience shapes emotional response. If you had an absent parent, Sanji hits different. If you experience bullying, Robin hits different. If you have ever felt like your entire community was erased from history while the world looked away, well, first I am sorry, and second, Law probably resonates with you on a frequency the rest of us cannot fully access. We cannot control what moves us. We can only control how we analyze what moves us. So I am proposing a framework. 3 metrics that, when combined, give us a somewhat objective measure of backstory devastation. These metrics are duration of suffering, agency denial, and hope destruction ratio. Let me break down each one. Duration of suffering is the simplest metric. It measures how long the character experienced their trauma, both in terms of the acute event and the lingering aftermath. A tragedy that lasts a single day is different from a tragedy that lasts 20 years. Robin's O'Hara incident was a single night of horror, but the aftermath stretched across 2 decades of isolation and survival. Law's Flavant's genocide was similarly concentrated in time, but his amber lead poisoning meant he was dying for years afterward until Corazon saved him. Brooke spent 50 years alone with corpses. 50 years. That is not a backstory. That is a prison sentence served in solitary confinement with your own skeleton crew. Duration matters because trauma that extends across time has more opportunities to compound, to reshape identity, to become the defining feature of a person rather than an event they survived. Agency denial measures how much control the character had over their situation. Could they have done anything to prevent or escape their suffering? Were they trapped by circumstance, by age, by power differentials they could not overcome? This metric matters because helplessness amplifies tragedy. A character who makes bad choices and suffers for them evokes sympathy, but also a degree of frustrated distance. A character who did everything right and still suffered, who was a child when the adults failed them, who had no possible avenue of resistance. That character evokes something closer to existential horror. We see ourselves in the helpless because we know that life can trap us too. Consider Sanji. He was a child. He could not fight his brothers, could not challenge his father, could not escape the dungeon without help. His suffering scores extremely high on agency denial because there was literally nothing a 6-year-old could do against a king with a clone army. Contrast this with a character like Odin, whose tragedy involves significant personal choice. Odin chose to dance. Odin chose to trust Orochi. Oda made decisions that contributed to his downfall, which makes his story complex, but slightly less devastating on the pure helplessness axis. We will get to Oda in detail later, because his backstory breaks several rules and deserves its own examination. Hope-destruction ratio is the most complex metric, and also the most important. It measures the gap between what the character believed was possible and what actually happened. A character who never had hope and never lost it experiences suffering but not devastation. A character who was given hope, who believed things would be okay, who saw the light at the end of the tunnel, and then watched that light get extinguished. That character experiences something far worse. Hope is emotional leverage. The higher you lift someone, the harder they fall. This is why the Don Quixote brothers' backstory is so effective. Homing believed he could give his sons a better life. He believed the world would accept them. He had hope, and his hope killed his family. This is why Senior Pink's story destroys us, despite being only 20 pages. Pink had everything. A wife, a son, a life that was working. He had achieved happiness. And then he lost it not through external attack, but through the consequences of his own lies catching up to him at the worst possible moment. The hope-destruction ratio was astronomical because the hope had been so high. Now let me apply this framework to a few examples so you can see how it works in practice. Robin scores high on duration, spending 20 years in isolation after the acute event. She scores extremely high on agency denial, being 8 years old during the Buster Call with no possible way to fight back against 5 vice admirals and 10 battleships. And she scores high on hope destruction because she had just found acceptance with the scholars, had just reunited with her mother, had just been told she was loved, and then everything burned. Total devastation score, extremely high across all 3 metrics. Law similarly scores high on duration due to years of amber lead poisoning and years of planning revenge. He scores extremely high on agency denial as a 10-year-old during a genocide. He could not stop. His hope-destruction ratio is complicated because he had less hope to destroy initially. His life in Flevance was already marked by disease, but the hope Corazon gave him and then had taken away creates a secondary spike in this metric. Total devastation score, extremely high, with a unique double peak structure. Brooke, who we will examine in depth shortly, scores off the charts on duration. 50 years alone. That number is so large, it almost becomes abstract. He scores moderately on agency denial because he was an adult during the initial tragedy and made choices that contributed to his crew's situation, but he had no control over the slow death that followed. His hope destruction ratio is severe because the Rumbar pirates were explicitly trying to reunite with Laboon. They had a promise to keep, and they died knowing they would break it. Total devastation score, extremely high, weighted heavily toward duration. This framework is not perfect. No framework for measuring human suffering can be perfect, but it gives us a common language for discussing why certain backstories hit harder than others. It moves us beyond simple subjective response into something approaching analysis. And in the sections that follow, we are going to apply this framework to backstories we have not yet discussed, to mysteries Oda has not yet revealed, and to the question of which One Piece character has suffered the most. The answer might surprise you, or it might confirm what you already suspected. Either way, we are going to do the math. Let me tell you about the backstories that do not exist yet, because sometimes what fictional pirate creator man refuses to show us is more significant than what he does. Oda has been writing One Piece for nearly 3 decades. He has given us flashbacks for side characters who appear in a single arc. He's devoted entire chapters to explaining why a man dresses like a baby. He has shown us the childhood trauma of characters who die 10 pages after being introduced. And yet, there are central figures in this story. Characters who have been present since the earliest chapters. Characters whose motivations drive the entire plot, about whom we know almost nothing. That absence is not accidental. That absence is a weapon Oda is holding in reserve, waiting for the moment when revealing the truth will cause maximum devastation. Let us start with the most conspicuous void in the entire manga. Monkey D. Dragon, the world's most wanted man, leader of the revolutionary army, Luffy's father, and a complete narrative ghost. Think about what we actually know about Dragon. He is Garp's son. He is Luffy's father. He leads the revolutionaries against the world government. He has some connection to wind, probably a devil fruit, maybe something else. He was present at Logtown when Luffy set sail and may have saved Luffy's life during the storm. He stood in the rain at Goa Kingdom watching the grey terminal burn while the nobles celebrated. And that is essentially it. That is everything Oda has given us about one of the most important characters in the story across nearly 30 years of serialization. We do not know why Dragon turned against the world government. We do not know what radicalized him. We do not know if there was a specific event, a single tragedy that transformed Garp's son into the leader of a global revolution. We do not know anything about Luffy's mother or what happened to her. We do not know why Dragon abandoned Luffy with Garp instead of raising him. We do not know if Dragon's famous tattoo has significance or if it is just Oda thinking facial ink looks cool. The man is a void shaped like a character, and that void is absolutely intentional. Here is my theory about why Oda has kept Dragon empty. Dragon's backstory is directly connected to something Oda cannot reveal yet without spoiling the endgame. Whatever happened to Dragon, whatever broke him or inspired him or turned him into the world government's greatest enemy, it is tied to the Void Century, to the true nature of the world government, to secrets that will not make sense. Until Luffy reaches Laugh Tale and learns the truth. Dragon's silence is not because his story is unimportant. His silence is because his story is too important to tell prematurely. When we finally learn what made Dragon, we will simultaneously learn something about the world that changes everything. This is Oda using the absence of backstory as foreshadowing. The hole in the narrative is shaped exactly like the revelation that will eventually fill it. And until that revelation comes, Dragon will continue doing what he has always done in this manga. Standing in the wind, looking east, contributing nothing to conversations, being the most narratively frustrating character in shonen history, while also being one of the most anticipated flashbacks in the entire medium. Now let us talk about Shanks, because Shanks is a different kind of mystery. We actually know some things about Shanks. We know he was on Roger's ship as an apprentice alongside Buggy. We know he was present at Laugh Tale, although whether he went ashore is ambiguous. We know he met Luffy in Fushia village and gave him the straw hat and lost an arm for him. We know he is one of the 4 emperors, that he stopped Kaido from interfering at Marineford, that he walked into the office of the 5 elders like he owned the place and had a conversation we were not allowed to hear. We know he has some connection to the Figureland family based on recent revelations. We know he cried at Roger's execution, but we do not know the important things. We do not know why Shanks became a pirate instead of following some other path. We do not know what he learned at Laugh Tale, or why it made him cry when Roger found out the truth. We do not know why he bet his arm on Luffy specifically, what he saw in that boy that made him decide the next generation's future was worth a limb. We do not know what he discussed with the Gorosei, or why they agreed to meet with a pirate. We do not know what his actual goal is because, unlike every other major player in this story, Shanks does not seem to be chasing the One Piece or world domination or anything concrete at all. Shanks moves through One Piece like a man who already knows how the story ends. He intervenes at specific moments, prevents certain conflicts, enables certain events, and then disappears back into the fog of narrative convenience. Either he is playing a game so complex that we cannot see the board, or Oda is keeping his motivations hidden because revealing them would collapse the mystery that makes him compelling. Either way, the absence of a Shanks flashback is one of the great strategic voids in the manga. And then there are the Gorosei, the Five Elders, the secret rulers of the world who we recently learned are not just politicians but monsters, literal demonic entities bound to Imu and empowered by whatever unholy bargain keeps the current system running. These men have been alive for 800 years. They were there when the world government was founded. They were there when the Void Century was being erased. They have presided over every atrocity, every genocide, every Buster Call, every slave auction, every single crime committed by the celestial dragons for 8 centuries. What do we know about their pasts? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. We do not know their names beyond recent reveals. We do not know where they came from. We do not know if they were human before they became whatever they are now. We do not know what they sacrificed for immortality or who they were before power consumed them. The Gorosei are 800 years of unexplored backstory, 8 centuries of potential tragedy or villainy or complexity that Oda has kept locked away. Here is the cockery I want to propose. What if the Gorosei have genuinely tragic backstories? What if they were not always monsters? What if, 800 years ago, they made choices they believed were necessary, sacrifices they thought would save the world, and those choices calcified into the tyranny we see today? Oda loves showing us that villains are made, not born. Doflamingo had the same trauma as Rocinante. Big Mom was an abandoned child manipulated by a nun. Kaido was experimented on by his own people. What if the Gorosei follow this pattern? What if learning their history makes us feel sympathy for the architects of 8 centuries of oppression? That would be the cruelest trick of all, making us understand the monsters, making us see ourselves in the system we want destroyed. And if anyone would pull that trick, it is fictional pirate creator man. The mysteries remain. Dragon looks east. Shanks makes moves we cannot interpret. The Gorosei wait in their chamber, 800 years of silence wrapped in suits. And somewhere, Oda is smiling, knowing exactly when he will finally speak. I need to talk about Brook now. And I need you to prepare yourself because what I am about to describe is not a backstory in the traditional sense. It is an endurance test. It is a meditation on isolation so extreme that it loops back around from tragic to absurd to tragic again. Brook's backstory is what happens when you apply the duration of suffering metric at maximum settings and then let it run for half a century. Fictional pirate creator man looked at this skeleton man making skull jokes and decided that his origin needed to be one of the most quietly horrifying things in the entire manga. And because Brook is funny, because he asks to see panties and makes puns about not having eyes, we sometimes forget that this man spent 50 years alone in the dark with the corpses of everyone he ever loved. Let me take you through it properly, because the details matter. Brook was a member of the Rumbar Pirates, a crew defined not by their strength or their ambitions, but by their love of music. They sailed the Grand Line, making people happy, playing songs, spreading joy wherever they went. And at some point, they met a baby whale at the Twin Capes. Laboon, a lonely island whale who'd been abandoned by his pod and latched onto the Rumbar Pirates because their music made him feel less alone. The crew adopted him as a mascot, a companion, a friend. They played for him. They let him follow their ship. And when they decided to enter the Grand Line proper, to continue their journey into more dangerous waters, they made Laboon a promise. Wait for us at the Twin Capes. We will circle the entire Grand Line and come back to you. We will return. This is the hope that makes the tragedy possible. The Rumbar pirates were not sailing toward treasure or glory. They were sailing in a circle, planning to come home, planning to keep a promise to a whale who loved them. That promise is the emotional foundation of everything that follows. The Grand Line killed them, not in battle, not in some dramatic confrontation with a powerful enemy, but through attrition, disease, poison, the slow grinding destruction that the ocean inflicts on anyone foolish enough to challenge it. One by one, the Rumbar pirates died. Their captain died, their doctor died, their navigator died. And as each one fell, the survivors faced a terrible realization. They were not going to make it back to Laboon. The promise was going to be broken. Brooke had eaten the Yomi Yomi no Mi, the revive fruit. Its power was simple. When you die, your soul returns to your body and you live again. One resurrection. 1 second chance. So when the poison finally took the last of the crew, when Brooke felt himself dying surrounded by his friends, he knew he would come back. He knew that his devil fruit would pull his soul out of the afterlife and return it to his corpse. And in those final moments, the surviving Rumbar pirates made a decision. They would record one last song. They would play Binks's Sake one final time, capturing the music on a tone dial so that whoever found them would know that the Rumbar pirates died singing. So that Brooke, when he returned, would have something to bring back to Laboon. Proof that they never forgot. Proof that they tried. Chapter 488 shows us this scene, and it is one of the most devastating sequences Oda has ever drawn. The pirates are dying. They can barely hold their instruments. The poison is shutting down their bodies one system at a time. And they play anyway. They sing anyway. One by one, they collapse over their instruments, the music getting thinner as fewer voices remain, until finally it is just Brooke, playing piano, singing alone, and then he dies too. The tone dial captures all of it, every note, every silence where a voice used to be. But here is where the true horror begins. Brooke's soul left his body and tried to return. That is how the Yomi Yomi no Mi works. The soul seeks the body and resurrection occurs. But the Florian Triangle, that cursed stretch of ocean where the Rumbar pirates fell, is perpetually shrouded in fog. Brooke's soul wandered through that fog for a year, searching for his body, unable to find it. By the time he finally returned, his flesh had rotted away. He came back to a skeleton. He came back to a ship full of skeletons. He came back to 50 years of solitude. 50 years. I keep repeating that number because I need it to sink in. Brooke spent 50 years on a ghost ship surrounded by the bones of his friends, unable to leave because devil fruit users cannot swim, and the Florian Triangle has no islands, no visitors, no human contact of any kind. He talked to the corpses. He made tea for them. He played music for them. He pretended they could still hear him because the alternative was admitting he was completely alone and might be alone forever. This is duration of suffering at its absolute maximum. Robin spent 20 years in isolation, but she could at least move. She could interact with people, even if she could not trust them. Brooke could not move. Brooke was trapped on a drifting coffin with nothing but bones and fog and the sound of his own voice slowly driving him mad. And he did not give up. He did not throw himself into the ocean, even though death would have been a release, because he still had the tone dial. He still had the recording of that last song. He still had a promise to keep. The afro matters here more than it might seem. Brooke refuses to change his hairstyle because it is the last physical feature Laboon would recognise. Everything else is bones now, indistinguishable from any other skeleton, but the afro is still Brooke. The afro is proof that he is the same person who made the promise 52 years ago. If he lost the afro, he would have nothing left of who he used to be. His identity survived half a century of solitude by clinging to a hairstyle. That is either inspiring or deeply sad, and probably both. When Brook finally meets Laboon again after joining the Straw Hats, when he plays Binks's sake for a whale who has been waiting at the Twin Capes for half a century, that moment lands with the accumulated weight of 50 years of suffering. The whale remembered. Brook remembered. The promise was kept, just 5 decades later than planned. It is a happy ending, built on so much sadness, that the happiness feels earned in a way few fictional moments ever achieve. Applying our framework, Brook scores maximum on duration, obviously. 50 years is longer than most characters in One Piece have been alive. He scores moderately on agency denial because he was an adult who made choices. The Rumbar pirates chose to enter the Grand Line, chose to make the promise. But once he was dead and resurrected, he had no options at all. His hope-destruction ratio is complex because he never lost hope entirely. The tone dial kept him going, but the hope was so thin, so fragile, stretched across so many years of darkness, that its preservation is almost more tragic than its destruction would have been. Brook is the Straw Hat who suffered longest, not the most intensely in a single moment, but the longest by far. And he wears that, suffering as a costume, making jokes, asking about panties, pretending to be the funny skeleton, because the alternative is being the skeleton who screamed into the fog for 50 years and nobody came. Everything I have told you about Oda's backstory construction needs to be temporarily set aside, because Kozuki Oden does not follow the rules. Oden's flashback is a deliberate violation of the patterns we have established, a conscious subversion of audience expectation that somehow makes the emotional payoff even stronger. Fictional pirate creator man spent decades teaching us how to feel about tragic characters, and then he introduced Oden and said, actually, what if I did it backwards? What if I made you hate him first and love him later? What if the tragedy only works because you started from a place of frustration? Let me explain what I mean. Every backstory we have discussed follows a similar emotional trajectory. We meet a character in the present. We sense there is pain beneath the surface. And then the flashback reveals that pain and we understand and we cry. The character is sympathetic from the beginning, or at least neutral. And the backstory deepens that sympathy into something profound. Nami is likable before we know about Arlong. Robin is mysterious, but not hateable before we know about O'Hara. Law is cool and competent before we know about Flavance. The flashback adds context to characters we already want to root for. Oden is different. Oden's flashback, which spans chapters 960 through 974, begins by making him genuinely difficult to like. We meet him as a young man, and he is chaotic, selfish, violent, and seemingly incapable of thinking about consequences. He kidnaps women. He starts fights. He gets exiled from the flower capital for causing too much destruction. His own father, the shogun of Wano, disowns him. The citizens of Wano consider him a menace, and Oda shows us all of this in detail, not glossing over Oden's flaws, but emphasizing them, making sure we understand that this man is a problem before he becomes a hero. This is a massive gamble narratively. You do not typically introduce your tragic figure by making the audience think he deserves whatever bad things happen to him. But Oda knows what he is doing. He is setting up a redemption arc that operates entirely within the flashback itself. We are not watching Oden become sympathetic in the present timeline. We are watching him become sympathetic in the past, in real time, as the flashback progresses. By the time he dies, we have travelled so far from our initial impression that his death feels like losing someone we personally saw grow up. The transformation happens in stages. First, we see that Oden's chaos is not malice, but overflow. He has too much energy, too much strength, too much life force for Wano to contain. He is not cruel, just impossible to restrain. When he defends the mountain god incident by taking responsibility for Kinemon's mistake, we see the first crack in our negative impression. This lunatic actually has a code. He protects his people even when they do not deserve protection. Then he joins Whitebeard. Then he joins Roger. And suddenly this chaotic idiot from a closed country is sailing with the two greatest pirates in the world, earning their respect, proving himself on the grandest stage imaginable. Oden walks laugh-tail with Roger. Oden learns the true history. Oden understands what needs to happen for Joy Boy to return. And instead of staying on the sea, instead of pursuing his own glory, he goes home. He returns to Wano because Wano needs him, because the country that exiled him is the country he has to save. Here is where Oda breaks our hearts by making Oden complicit in his own tragedy. Orochi and Kaido orchestrate a takeover while Oden is away. By the time Oden returns, Wano is already half conquered, and Oden, confronted with the reality of what has happened, makes a deal. A stupid deal. A deal that any rational person would reject. Orochi tells him that if Oden dances naked in the streets of the capital once a week for 5 years, Orochi will release the hostages he is secretly holding and eventually leave Wano peacefully. And Oden agrees. He agrees to humiliate himself, to destroy his own reputation, to become a laughingstock in the eyes of his people, because he believes it will save them. For 5 years, the hero of Wano dances. For 5 years, the man who sailed with Roger and Whitebeard strips down and performs like a fool while citizens throw garbage at him and call him a disgrace. His retainers do not understand. His family suffers. Everything he built crumbles around him. And he endures it because he made a promise. Because he thinks he is protecting people. Because Kozuki Oden does not know how to break a deal, even when the deal is obviously a trap. The deal was always a lie. Orochi never intended to leave. The hostages were already dead. 5 years of dancing brought Wano nothing except time for Kaido to strengthen his grip. When Oden finally learns the truth, when he finally snaps and attacks Kaido directly, it is too late. The window for victory has closed, and Oden is captured, sentenced to death by boiling in oil. Chapter 972 is the execution. The legendary hour. Oden and his 9 retainers are thrown into a massive pot of boiling oil, and instead of dying immediately, Oden lifts a wooden plank above his head and holds all 9 of his followers out of the liquid. He carries them. For over an hour, he stands in boiling oil, his flesh cooking, his strength failing, holding his people above the death that is consuming him. Kaido, impressed despite himself, offers a deal. Anyone still alive when the hour ends will be set free. Oden survives the hour. Oden holds his retainers above the oil for over 60 minutes through sheer force of will. And when the hour ends, when he has technically won, Orochi changes the rules. No release. Execution by firing squad instead. Because villains do not honor bargains with dead men. Oden throws his retainers to safety. He launches them out of the pot with his last strength, screaming at them to open Wano's borders, to find Joy Boy, to finish what he could not complete, and then he dies. Shot through the head while standing in boiling oil, smiling, because Kozuki Oden does not know how to die without style. This is the backstory that breaks the formula. We started by thinking Oden was an idiot. We end by knowing he was an idiot. But an idiot who loved so fiercely and believed so completely that his idiocy became heroism. The 5 years of dancing were stupid. The deal with Orochi was stupid. Trusting a snake to keep his word was catastrophically stupid. But that stupidity came from hope, from the belief that people can be reasoned with, from a refusal to abandon faith in negotiation even when violence would have been more effective. Oden was wrong about Orochi. He was wrong about the deal, but he was not wrong to hope. And his hope became the foundation for the Scabbard's 20-year mission, for Momonosuke's survival, for the eventual liberation of Wano. Applying our framework, Oden scores moderately on duration because his acute suffering was concentrated in the final hours, though his 5 years of humiliation adds significant length. He scores lower on agency denial than most characters because he made choices that contributed to his fate, but those choices were made with incomplete information and good intentions. His hope-destruction ratio is through the roof because he genuinely believed the dance would work, genuinely believed Kaido could be defeated in a direct assault, and was wrong both times. Oden is the exception that proves the rule. His backstory works because it violates the formula, and his death is legendary because he earned it by being foolish enough to believe in a world that did not deserve his faith. I want to propose something that might sound grandiose, but bear with me, because I think it is the key to understanding why One Piece backstories resonate so deeply. Every tragedy we have discussed, every dead parent and burned island and 50-year solitude exists within a larger tragedy that we have not been shown yet. The individual backstories are symptoms. The Void Century is the disease. And when Oda finally reveals what happened 800 years ago, every single tearful moment we have experienced will be recontextualized as a consequence of that original sin. The entire world of One Piece is a backstory. We just do not know whose backstory it is yet. Let me explain what I mean. The Void Century is a 100-year period of history that the world government has systematically erased. Studying it is punishable by death, as Ohara learned. The only records that survive are the poneglyphs, indestructible stone tablets, written in an ancient language that only a handful of people can read. These stones are scattered across the world, hidden in impossible locations, guarded by nations and pirates and ancient alliances. They contain the true history of what happened, who the ancient kingdom was, why the world government formed, and what Joy Boy promised to do but failed to accomplish. We have pieces of this story now. Recent chapters have given us fragments. We know that Joy Boy existed, that he made a promise to the fishmen of the seafloor, that he possessed a power similar to Luffy's Nika fruit, that he tried to do something world-changing and did not succeed. We know that the world government was formed by 20 kings who allied against the ancient kingdom and won. We know that the celestial dragons are descendants of those kings, elevated to godhood as a reward for their victory. We know that Imu exists, a figure who sits on the empty throne that supposedly no one is allowed to occupy, ruling the world from the shadows for 8 centuries. But we do not know why. We do not know what the ancient kingdom was fighting for. We do not know what Joy Boy's promise actually entailed. We do not know why the world government is so terrified of this information becoming public that they will commit genocide to suppress it. The Void Century is a narrative black hole at the center of One Piece, and every tragedy in the series orbits around it. Think about what we have covered. Robin's Island was destroyed because scholars were trying to read the poneglyphs. The crime that justified the Buster Call, the crime that made a 9-year-old girl a global fugitive, was attempting to learn history, not plotting revolution, not building weapons, reading. The world government killed everyone on Ohara because knowledge of the Void Century is more dangerous to them than any army. Law's country was destroyed by a system that prioritizes stability over truth. Flevance was erased and forgotten, swept under the rug of history, just like the Void Century itself. The same mechanisms that suppressed the ancient kingdom's memory allowed the world to forget an entire nation died for corporate profit. The bureaucracy of silence that protects the celestial dragons protected the lies about Amber Lead. The fishmen suffer because of a promise Joy Boy broke. 800 years ago, Joy Boy told the fishmen he would bring them to the surface, would end their exile beneath the waves, would fulfill some grand vision that we do not yet understand. He failed. He left behind an apology carved in stone. And the fishmen have been waiting ever since, generation after generation, hoping that someday someone would finish what Joy Boy started. Fisher Tiger's rage, Otohimi's dream, Jinbei's inherited mission, all of it traces back to a broken promise from the Void Century. Even the Straw Hats themselves are shaped by this hidden history. Luffy carries Joy Boy's will whether he knows it or not. The Nika fruit chose him, or perhaps was guided to him, because he has the qualities Joy Boy needed in a successor. When Luffy awakened his power in Wano, when he became the sun god that the slaves of Mariajoie whisper about, he stepped into a role that has been waiting 800 years to be filled. His entire journey, from the barrel in Alvida's ship to the throne of Wano, has been a path toward completing someone else's unfinished business. This is the inherited will trauma model applied at civilizational scale. Joy Boy failed, and his failure became the world's inheritance. Every generation since has carried the weight of that failure forward, even when they did not know what they were carrying. The poneglyphs are not just historical records. They are a to-do list from a dead man. They are homework that humanity has been avoiding for 8 centuries. Here is the cockery I want to leave you with for this section. When we finally learn what Joy Boy was trying to do, when Luffy reaches Laugh Tale and reads the final poneglyph and understands the true history, I believe it will reframe every backstory in the series. We will look back at Robin and realise her suffering was not random. It was the world government actively preventing Joy Boy's plan from being completed. We will look back at the fishmen and understand that their oppression is not just bigotry, it is punishment for being on the wrong side of a war that ended 800 years ago. We will look back at every celestial dragon atrocity and see it as the ongoing victory lap of the kings who killed the ancient kingdom and wanted to make sure it stayed dead. The individual tragedies will not become less sad. They will become more sad, because they will be revealed as unnecessary. The Void Century did not have to end the way it did. Joy Boy did not have to fail. The world did not have to become this cruel machine that grinds up children and islands and entire species. Someone made choices 800 years ago, and we are all still living in the consequences of those choices, and the people in power have spent every day since making sure no one remembers that it could have been different. That is the ultimate backstory. Not a character's past. The world's past. One Piece is not just a story about a boy becoming Pirate King. It is a story about history's longest cover-up finally being exposed. It is a story about inherited trauma at civilizational scale. About breaking cycles that have been running for 8 centuries. About finally finishing the homework that Joy Boy left behind. When Luffy laughs at Laugh Tale, when he learns whatever Roger learned and found so funny that he named the island after it, we will finally understand. And I suspect, knowing fictional pirate creator man, that understanding will make everything we have already cried about hurt even more. The Void Century is the backstory we have been reading toward for nearly 3 decades. And it is coming, whether we are ready or not. We have spent 3 sagas dissecting the mechanics of One Piece backstories. We have examined timing and parents and inherited our will and smiles through tears. We have ranked suffering and explored mysteries and confronted the Void Century itself. But now I want to address the question that underlies all of this analysis. Why does it work? Not how does it work? We have covered that extensively. But why does One Piece succeed at making us feel things when so many other manga fail? This is not a rhetorical question. The shonen genre is filled with tragic backstories. Every protagonist has a dead parent, or a destroyed village, or a childhood trauma that motivates their journey. Naruto lost his parents and grew up hated by his village. Ichigo watched his mother die and blamed himself for years. Goku's entire species was genocided. Tanjiro's family was slaughtered in the first chapter of Demon Slayer. Tragedy is standard issue equipment for shonen heroes. It comes with the application form. And yet, when I think about the moments in fiction that have genuinely wrecked me, that have had me staring at a wall processing my emotions like a computer running heavy software, One Piece dominates the list in a way that feels statistically improbable. I have cried at other manga. I am not made of stone. But One Piece makes me cry differently. It makes me cry in a way that feels earned rather than manipulated. And that distinction, the difference between earned emotion and manipulated emotion, is the key to understanding why fictional pirate creator man operates on a different level than his peers. Let me explain what I mean by earned emotion. Manipulated emotion is when a story deploys sad music and close-ups of crying faces and expects you to feel sad because the technical signals of sadness are present. It is when a character dies and the story pauses to tell you this is sad. Look how sad everyone is. You should be sad too. Manipulated emotion works in the moment but fades quickly because it was never yours. The story told you how to feel instead of making you feel it yourself. Earned emotion is different. Earned emotion happens when a story has done so much groundwork, has built so much context, has made you invest so deeply in characters and situations that the emotional payoff arrives not because the story tells you to feel it, but because you cannot help feeling it. The story did not manipulate you into sadness. The story created conditions where sadness was the only possible response. That is what Oda does. That is why we cry at One Piece when we only get misty at other manga. The groundwork is everything. Consider how long Oda waits before deploying his backstories. We discussed this in the flashback placement theory section, but I want to emphasize it again from a different angle. Most shonen manga front-load their tragedy. Here is the protagonist. Here is their sad past. Now root for them. The investment is requested immediately. One Piece makes you invest first. You spend dozens of chapters with Nami before you learn about Arlong. You spend hundreds of chapters with Robin before Ohara. You spend 800 chapters with Sanji before Herma. By the time the backstory arrives, you are not learning about a character. You are learning about someone you already care about. The difference is everything. Other manga tell you a character is important and expect you to believe it. One Piece shows you a character being important, being funny and brave and flawed and real, and then reveals the pain underneath. The revelation does not create your attachment. Your attachment makes the revelation devastating. This is the order of operations that so many stories get wrong. Tragedy without investment is just information. Investment plus tragedy is emotional mathematics with compound interest. There's also the matter of consequences. In many shonen manga, tragic backstories exist in a vacuum. They explain why a character is motivated, but they do not continue to shape the narrative in meaningful ways. The protagonist has a sad past. They reference it occasionally, and then they power up and defeat the villain, and the sad past becomes a trophy on the shelf of their character development. Done. Resolved. Moving on. One Piece does not let tragedy stay in the past. Robin's trauma from Ohara shapes how she interacts with every situation. Her instinct to run, her difficulty trusting, her assumption that attachment leads to destruction. These are not backstory elements that get resolved and forgotten. They are ongoing aspects of her character that inform her decisions throughout the entire series. When Robin finally stands with the Straw Hats against the world government, when she finally chooses to trust completely, that moment resonates because we have watched her struggle with trust for hundreds of chapters. The backstory is not a static explanation. It is a living wound that affects everything. Oda also understands something about hope that other mangaka miss. Tragedy alone is not devastating. Tragedy plus hope is devastating. The cruelest thing you can do to an audience is make them believe things might be okay, and then take that belief away. Every One Piece backstory contains a moment where survival or happiness seems possible, where the character or their loved ones almost make it, and then the door closes. Bellemere almost escaped notice. The scholars of Ohara almost saved their knowledge. Corazon almost got Law to safety without being discovered. Senior Pink almost had a perfect life. The almosts are what break us. The almosts are what separate tragedy from devastation. Compare this to something like Demon Slayer, where Tanjiro's family is killed in Chapter 1 before we have any attachment to them. It is sad in an abstract way. We understand that losing your family is terrible. But we did not know those characters. We did not see them live before we saw them die. There are no almosts. There is just death as a premise. Death as a starting gun. Death as motivation fuel. It works for what that story is trying to do. But it does not wreck you the way One Piece wrecks you because the investment was never built. Fictional pirate creator man has been writing One Piece for nearly 30 years. That length is not just a testament to his endurance, it is a creative weapon. He has had time to build investment that other stories cannot match. He has had time to plant seeds that bloom decades later. He has had time to make us love characters so deeply that their pain becomes our pain in a way that shorter stories simply cannot achieve. One Piece makes us feel because Oda has earned the right to make us feel. He put in the work. He built the foundation. And when he pulls the trigger on a backstory, the impact travels through years of accumulated care. That is why we cry. Not because One Piece is sadder than other manga, because One Piece makes us care first and cry second. And caring, real caring, takes time that Oda has always been willing to spend. I want to talk about Eiichiro Oda now. Not fictional pirate creator man, the mythical figure who sits in a room somewhere in Japan drawing pirates at inhuman speed. Not Goda, the nickname fans use when he drops a revelation that makes us question whether he has had the entire story planned since 1997. I want to talk about Oda the person, because I think understanding his life, at least the fragments of it we have access to, helps explain why his depictions of grief feel so authentic. You cannot write loss this well without understanding loss, and Oda understands loss. Let me be clear about the limitations here. Oda is famously private. He does not do many interviews. He communicates with fans primarily through the SBS question corners in the manga volumes, where he answers reader questions with a mix of genuine information and deliberate trolling. We know more about the blood types of his fictional characters than we know about his daily life. But there are pieces, there are fragments, and those fragments paint a picture of a man who has experienced enough pain to fuel 20,000 pages of emotional devastation. The most significant documented loss in Oda's professional life was the death of his editor, Kazuki Takizawa, in 2017. Takizawa had been working with Oda since the early days of One Piece. He was not just an editor in the corporate sense, reviewing pages and suggesting changes. By all accounts, he was a creative partner, someone who understood what Oda was trying to do and helped him do it better. When Takizawa died of a heart attack at the age of 57, Oda took a break from serialization to attend the funeral, which is remarkable given his notorious reluctance to take breaks for any reason. In the tribute page Oda published afterward, he wrote about how Takizawa had helped shape the series during its formative years. The relationship between a mangaka and their editor is difficult for outsiders to fully understand, but it is often compared to a marriage. Years of collaboration, creative disagreements resolved through trust, the shared experience of building something together. Losing that partnership, especially for someone as intensely dedicated to his work as Oda, would have been devastating in ways that do not translate easily into words. I think about this when I consider how Oda writes the death of mentors. Tom sacrificing himself for Frankie, Hiruluk dying while praising Chopper's effort, Corazon using his last moments to protect Law. These are not generic mentor deaths. They are specific in their emotional detail. They capture something about the guilt of surviving when someone who helped you does not. They capture something about the weight of continuing work that someone else will never see completed. I am not saying Oda based these characters on Takizawa specifically, but I am saying that a man who has experienced the loss of a crucial creative partner probably understands that particular flavour of grief in a way that informs his writing. Then there is Oda's health. This is well documented even given his privacy, because it has affected the manga's publication schedule in visible ways. Oda has been hospitalised multiple times. He works on a schedule that medical professionals have publicly described as dangerous. For decades, he slept 3 to 4 hours a night. He rarely left his studio. He drew One Piece with an intensity that his own body could not sustain, and his body eventually made that fact undeniable through illness. In SBS columns and rare interviews, Oda has been candid about the physical cost of creating One Piece. He has talked about surgeries. He has talked about being told by doctors that he needed to slow down or face serious consequences. He has talked about missing events in his daughters' lives because he was chained to his drawing desk. The man has given 27 years of his life to this manga, and some of those years were given in the literal sense of trading future health for present pages. Why does this matter for understanding his backstories? Because Oda knows what it means to sacrifice. He knows what it means to give up something irreplaceable for a goal you believe in. When he writes characters who destroy their bodies for their dreams, he is not imagining that experience from a comfortable distance. He's writing from a place of recognition. The One Piece fandom often jokes about Oda being a machine, an inhuman content generator who will never stop producing chapters. But he's not a machine. He's a person who has chosen to damage himself for his art. That choice echoes in every character who chooses similarly. There are also the smaller details that emerge through SBS columns. Oda has mentioned growing up reading manga during periods of loneliness. He has mentioned feeling like an outsider. He has mentioned the particular salvation that stories provided when reality was difficult. These are not dramatic tragedies. They are the ordinary pains of growing up, the quiet isolation that many creative people experience before finding their voice. But quiet pain is still pain. And Oda has channeled that understanding into characters like Robin, who found solace in books when people rejected her, like Chopper, who found purpose in medicine when society called him a monster. The outcasts of One Piece ring true because their creator understands what it means to feel outside. I want to be careful here not to over-psychoanalyze a man I have never met based on fragments of public information. I do not know Oda. I cannot claim to understand his inner life. But I can observe that his depictions of grief have a specificity that suggests experience rather than imagination. When he writes about the particular loneliness of losing someone who believed in your work, it feels like he knows. When he writes about the cost of dedication pushed past healthy limits, It feels like he knows. When he writes about finding family among people who accept your weirdness, it feels like he knows. Fiction does not require autobiographical accuracy to be emotionally true. Oda is not literally Robin or Law or Brooke, but the authenticity of their suffering suggests that he has touched the same wells they draw from. He has known loss. He has known isolation. He has known the terrible arithmetic of trading health for creation. And that knowledge, processed through decades of craft and refinement, emerges as backstories that make us ugly cry at 3 a.m. Fictional pirate creator man is a nickname we use to maintain ironic distance from the fact that this is just a pirate manga, and we should not care this much. But the reason we care this much is that there is a real person behind the fiction, a person who has put real pain on the page. The tears we cry are responses to real understanding disguised as funny drawings of rubber boys and reindeer doctors. And that is why One Piece hits different. Because somewhere in Japan, a man who has known grief is translating that grief into a language we can all understand. Everything we have discussed over the past 3 hours is prologue. Every backstory we have dissected, every tear we have analysed, every mechanism of emotional destruction we have identified, all of it exists in a state of incompletion. Because Oda is not finished. The final act of One Piece is approaching, and with it will come revelations that recontextualize everything we thought we understood. The tears we have cried so far are practice. The real devastation is still coming. And I want to spend this section thinking about what form that devastation might take. Let me start with Luffy's dream, not becoming Pirate King. That is the stated goal, the public ambition, the thing Luffy shouts from rooftops. I am talking about the other dream, the secret one. The dream Luffy whispered to Sabo and Ace as a child, the one that made them both laugh and call him an idiot. The one that Oda has deliberately hidden from us across 27 years of serialization. We know this dream exists. We know Roger had the same dream, because when Oden heard it from Roger, he reacted the same way Ace and Sabo did. We know Yamato knows it because Oden wrote it in his journal, but we do not know what it is. The content remains obscured, silhouetted, held in reserve for a moment Oda has not yet determined we are ready for. Whatever that dream is, it will change everything. It has to. You do not hide a character's core motivation for nearly 3 decades unless revealing it will fundamentally alter how the audience perceives the story. When we finally learn what Luffy actually wants, what Roger actually wanted, what Joy Boy wanted 800 years ago, every action Luffy has taken will be reframed through that lens. Every island he has liberated. Every tyrant he has toppled. Every friend he has made, an enemy he has defeated. All of it will connect to this hidden dream in ways we cannot currently perceive. Here is my speculation, and I want to be clear that this is cockery of the highest order. I think Luffy's dream is something impossibly childish and impossibly profound at the same time. I think it is the kind of dream that sounds stupid when you say it out loud, but becomes beautiful when you understand what it really means. The fact that Sabo and Ace laughed suggests absurdity. The fact that Roger had the same dream suggests universality. I suspect it is something like wanting everyone in the world to be free, or wanting to throw a party where everyone is invited, or wanting to end the barriers that separate people from each other. Something that sounds like the naive wish of a 7-year-old, but carries implications that would require dismantling the entire world government to achieve. When this dream is revealed, when we understand what Luffy has been working toward all along, I think it will cast every backstory in a new light. Robin's suffering was not just the result of authoritarian cruelty. It was a direct consequence of the systems that oppose Luffy's dream. Law's genocide was not random tragedy. It was the inevitable product of a world organised around the principles that Luffy's dream would destroy. Every tear we have cried was crying for a world that did not have to be this way, a world that Joy Boy tried to change and failed, a world that Luffy might finally succeed in transforming. And then there is the One Piece itself, the treasure that Roger left at Laugh Tale, the prize that every pirate in the world is theoretically chasing. We still do not know what it is. We know Roger laughed when he found it. We know he named the island Laugh Tale as a result. We know he considered it a joke, or perhaps considered the timing of its discovery a joke. Something about the One Piece was funny to a dying man who knew he would never accomplish what it required. I have a theory about why Roger laughed, and it connects to the recontextualization thesis. I think Roger laughed because the One Piece revealed the absurdity of what he was trying to do too late to do it. He reached the end of the Grand Line, found the treasure, learned the true history, understood what Joy Boy wanted and why he failed, and realized that he, Roger, was also too early. The world was not ready. The pieces were not in place. The will of D had not yet found its proper vessel. Roger laughed because after a lifetime of struggle, he discovered that his role was not to complete the mission but to pass it on. He was a messenger, not a messiah. And that is hilarious in the darkest possible way. If I am right, then the One Piece is not treasure in the traditional sense. It is information. It is a message from Joy Boy explaining what needs to happen and why it has not happened yet. It is the world's longest homework assignment, waiting 800 years for someone with the ability and the timing to actually complete it. And when Luffy reaches Laugh Tale, when he reads that message, when he understands what Joy Boy could not do and what he himself might be able to accomplish, that moment will reframe everything. Every backstory will become a casualty report from an 800-year war. Every dead parent will be a soldier who fell because the battle was not yet won. Every burned island and erased history and tortured child will be proof of what happens when Joy Boy's dream remains unfulfilled. The tragedy will not diminish. It will expand. It will become part of something so large that the individual losses feel simultaneously more meaningful and more unbearable. I think about Robin in this context. When Luffy becomes Pirate King, when the truth of the Void Century is finally exposed, Robin will have achieved her life's goal. She will know the history that O'Hara died to protect. But that knowledge will come with the understanding that her mother and the scholars did not die randomly. They died because they were threats to a system that Joy Boy opposed and failed to destroy. Their deaths were not meaningless, but they were also not necessary. In a world where Joy Boy succeeded, there would have been no Buster Call. There would have been no need to suppress history. Olivia would have lived. O'Hara would have survived. Robin would have grown up loved. That is the recontextualization that awaits us. Not that the tragedies were meaningful, that they were preventable, that every single backstory is evidence of a failure 800 years in the making, and that Luffy, the idiot in the straw hat who wants to be the freest man on the sea, might finally be the one to make all that suffering worth something. Fictional pirate creator man has been building toward this moment for nearly 30 years. When it arrives, when Luffy stands at Laugh Tale and learns what Roger learned and Joy Boy knew, we will not just cry for the characters. We will cry for a fictional world that has been in pain for 8 centuries, finally seeing the dawn that Odin promised. And somehow, impossibly, it will be worth every tear. Here is something I have been thinking about for years, and I want to share it with you now because we are approaching the end, and this feels like the right moment. The Straw Hat Pirates are not a crew. Not really. Not in the traditional sense of a group assembled for a common practical purpose. They are a support group. They are a collection of people who were discarded by the world, who found each other through coincidence and stubbornness, and Luffy's complete inability to take no for an answer, and who have been healing each other ever since. Every member of the Straw Hats was broken before they joined. Every member of the Straw Hats is less broken now. And when this crew finally changes the world, it will be because they're made of exactly the kind of people the world tried to throw away. Let me walk through the roster one more time, not to repeat their backstories, but to observe what they have in common. Luffy lost his brother and his childhood idol, and grew up raised by bandits because his grandfather thought that was acceptable parenting. Zoro lost his best friend and rival when they were children, and has been chasing a promise made to a dead girl ever since. Nami was enslaved by the man who killed her mother and spent her childhood buying freedom she was never going to receive. Usopp's father abandoned him and his mother died, and he responded by becoming a liar because reality was too painful to inhabit. Sanji was tortured by his family and locked in a dungeon and told he was worthless until he believed it. Chopper was rejected by his herd for being different and rejected by humans for being a monster, and lost the one person who accepted him to a poison he accidentally provided. Robin was hunted across the world for 20 years because she had the audacity to survive a genocide. Frankie was abandoned by his parents and lost his mentor to government execution and blew himself up trying to stop a train. Brooke spent 50 years alone with corpses, waiting for someone to come, waiting to fulfill a promise that seemed more impossible with each passing decade. Jinbei lost his captain, lost his friend, lost his queen, and spent his life trying to bridge a gap between species that 800 years of hatred made nearly unbridgeable. These people found each other. That is the miracle at the heart of One Piece. Not that Luffy has a powerful devil fruit, or that Zoro can cut through anything, or that the crew keeps defeating increasingly impossible enemies. The miracle is that 10 broken people collided in exactly the right configuration to make each other whole. Consider how their traumas complement rather than compete. Robin learned that attachment leads to death, that everyone who loves her will be destroyed. She joins a crew full of people who refuse to let their loved ones be destroyed. Sanji was told his kindness was weakness, that feeding people was shameful, that his heart was a defect. He joins a crew that treasures kindness, that sees feeding people as sacred, that considers his heart his greatest strength. Nami was taught that she could not trust anyone, that people would always betray her, that survival meant isolation. She joins a crew that literally goes to war against the world government to prove they will not abandon her. Each Straw Hat provides something another Straw Hat needs. Luffy gives Robin a reason to live. Zoro gives Chopper a model of quiet strength. Usopp gives everyone permission to be afraid and brave at the same time. Sanji feeds them, literally nourishes them, refuses to let anyone go hungry regardless of circumstance. Frankie builds them a home that sails. Brooke gives them music to heal by. Nami navigates them toward futures they could not find alone. Jinbei provides the steady wisdom of someone who has already walked the path of inherited trauma and emerged with his principles intact. This is not accidental. Oda designed this crew to be a therapeutic ecosystem. Each member's wound is addressed by another member's gift. Each member's strength compensates for another member's weakness. They are not just friends. They are treatment. They are what happens when people who were told they did not deserve love find people who love them anyway. And here is why this matters for the endgame. The world government rules through isolation. The celestial dragons maintain power by convincing people that hierarchies are natural, that some lives matter more than others, that connection across class and species and history is impossible. Every system in One Piece is designed to keep people separate. The red line divides the oceans. Marie-Joie sits above everyone, literally elevated, unreachable. The void century was erased to prevent people from connecting to their own past. Isolation is the mechanism of control. The Straw Hats are the opposite of isolation. They are connection made manifest. A rubber boy and a swordsman and a thief and a liar and a cook and a reindeer and an archaeologist and a cyborg and a skeleton and a fishman. Sailing together, fighting together, eating together, refusing to let the world's categories define who can be family. Every time they add a member, they are rejecting the premise that some people are too different to love. Every time they save an island, they are proving that connection is possible, even in a world designed to prevent it. When Luffy becomes Pirate King, when he achieves whatever Joy Boy could not achieve, it will not be because he is the strongest or the smartest or the most strategically brilliant. It will be because he built a family out of wreckage. It will be because he looked at people the world had discarded and saw treasure. It will be because his fundamental rejection of hierarchy, his bone-deep inability to accept that anyone is beneath him, created a crew capable of challenging the foundations of an 800-year-old system. The Straw Hats will change the world because they are what the world looks like when you refuse to throw people away. They are proof that the broken can be mended, that the isolated can find connection, that the discarded can become invaluable. Every backstory we have cried about produced a person strong enough to be part of this crew. Every tragedy was the forge that created someone capable of sailing to Laugh Tale and beyond. Robin's suffering made her the only person who can read the poneglyphs. Law's genocide made him the surgeon who could operate on anything. Sanji's abuse made him the cook, who will never let anyone starve. The world broke these people, and the Straw Hats rebuilt them, and now those rebuilt people are going to break the world right back. That is the beautiful mathematics of One Piece. Pain transformed into purpose. Isolation transformed into connection. A crew of misfits who should not work together and yet work together perfectly, sailing toward a dawn that has been waiting 800 years. Fictional pirate creator. Man did not just write sad backstories. He wrote a thesis on redemption. He wrote a proof that love can be salvaged from wreckage. He wrote the Straw Hat Pirates. We began this journey 3 hours ago with an arm. Shanks's arm. The limb that a legendary pirate sacrificed in the first chapter of One Piece to save a 7-year-old boy from a sea king. I told you then that the arm was a prototype, that it was Oda's proof of concept for everything that would follow. And now, after 20 sections and 25,000 words, after dissecting the anatomy of tears and cataloguing the gallery of the damned and constructing hierarchies of suffering and examining the Straw Hats as a collective trauma response, I want to return to that arm, because everything we have discussed, every mechanism of emotional devastation that fictional pirate creator man has deployed over nearly 3 decades, began with that single sacrifice in Chapter 1. Shanks did not need to lose that arm. We established this. The man has Conqueror's haki capable of splitting the sky. He could have scared the Sea King away with a glare. But Oda's editor told him the opening needed more impact, and so Oda redrew the scene with Shanks emerging from the water 1 arm lighter. And in that editorial revision, the entire emotional architecture of One Piece was established. Sacrifice is the currency. Love is expressed through loss. The people who matter will pay in irreplaceable pieces of themselves for the people they love. Every backstory we have examined is a variation on that theme. Bellamere sacrificed her life rather than deny her daughters. Tom sacrificed his freedom rather than deny his ships. Hiruluk sacrificed his remaining days rather than deny Chopper's love. Corazon sacrificed his mission, his cover, and his life rather than deny Law a future. Senior Pink sacrificed his dignity rather than deny Russian a smile. Odin sacrificed his reputation and then his body rather than deny his retainers a chance at survival. The arm set the template. The rest of the manga has been filling in variations. But here is what I have come to understand over the course of making this video, over the course of analysing these backstories until my eyes blurred and my notes became incomprehensible even to myself. The sacrifice is not the point. The sacrifice is the mechanism. The point is what the sacrifice makes possible. Shanks gave his arm so that Luffy could live. Not just survive the Sea King, but live. Have a future. Become someone. Shanks saw something in that loud, stubborn, impossibly sincere child, and he decided that whatever Luffy might become was worth more than his arm. The sacrifice was a bet that this kid would do something worth being maimed for, and Luffy has spent the entire series trying to prove that bet correct. Every backstory contains this same structure when you look closely enough. The sacrifice creates a debt that the survivor spends their life repaying. Nami inherits Bellamir's death and repays it by becoming free. Chopper inherits Heruluk's death and repays it by becoming a doctor who will cure any disease. Law inherits Corazon's death and repays it by destroying Doflamingo and carrying the D in his name forward. Robin inherits O'Hara's death and repays it by surviving long enough to read the poneglyphs and learn the truth the scholars died protecting. The sacrifice is a debt, and the debt is a purpose, and the purpose is what keeps the survivors moving forward when grief should have stopped them. Luffy carries more of these debts than anyone. Shanks's arm, Ace's life, the will of Roger and Joy Boy, and everyone who passed the straw hat down the line. He is a walking collection of inherited obligations, a boy made of rubber and other people's sacrifices, sailing toward a destiny that was purchased with blood he did not ask anyone to spend. And somehow, impossibly, he does not seem burdened by it. He laughs. He eats meat. He makes friends everywhere he goes. He treats the weight of the world like it is nothing, because to him, it is nothing. Not because he does not understand the cost, because he has decided to pay it gladly. That is the answer to the question I posed at the beginning. Why do One Piece backstories hit so hard? Yes, because of timing. Yes, because of parental death. Yes, because of inherited will and smiles through tears and all the other techniques we have catalogued. But underneath all of that, the real answer is simpler. One Piece backstories hit hard because they are about love. Not romantic love, though that exists in the margins. Love in the sense of caring about someone more than you care about yourself. Love in the sense of giving something you cannot get back, because the alternative is watching someone you value suffer. Love as sacrifice. Love as currency. Love as the force that moves the entire narrative forward. Shanks loved Luffy enough to lose an arm. Bellamere loved Nami enough to die. Corazon loved Law enough to abandon everything else. And Luffy loves his crew enough to fight the entire world for any one of them. That is what we respond to when we cry at these backstories, not the death itself. The love that made the death mean something. Oda understands this. He has always understood this. From chapter 1, from the arm in the water, he has been telling us that One Piece is a story about what love costs and what love creates. The tears are not the point. The tears are evidence that we understood. Evidence that we recognized the sacrifice and felt its weight. Evidence that somewhere in our own lives, we have experienced love fierce enough to make loss unbearable. Oda is not manipulating us when he makes us cry. He is reminding us what we already know. That love is the only thing worth sacrificing for, and that sacrifice is how love proves itself real. So here we are, 3 hours later. 25,000 words of analysis about why a pirate manga makes grown adults weep. And I find myself back at the beginning, looking at a red-haired man climbing out of the water with one arm, smiling at a crying child, telling him that the arm was a small price to pay. I understand that scene differently now than I did when I first read it. I understand that Shanks was not just saving Luffy. He was teaching him. He was showing him what love looks like when it has to make a choice. And Luffy learned. Luffy has been demonstrating that lesson ever since. The arm was the prototype. Everything else was refinement. And the tears we have cried across nearly 30 years of One Piece are proof that Oda's design works exactly as intended. Thank you for spending these 3 hours with me. Thank you for letting me dissect something we all love and examine it under harsh analytical light. I hope the machinery I've shown you does not diminish the magic. I hope knowing how the trick works does not stop the trick from working. Because I have analysed these backstories down to their component atoms, and they still make me cry every time I read them. That is the real magic of One Piece. Understanding it does not break the spell. If anything, understanding it makes the spell stronger. But you let me know what you think in the comments. And please do subscribe to this channel for consistent injections of One Piece culture administered directly into your YouTube feed.